HarperCollins and Harper Audio present The Collector, a novel by Daniel Silva, performed by Eduardo Ballerini. As always, for my wife Jamie, and my children Lily and Nicholas. We all want things we can't have. Being a decent human being is accepting that. John Fowles, The Collector. And remember, you must never, under any circumstances, despair. To hope and to act, these are our duties in misfortune. Boris Pasternak, Dr. Zhivago. Part 1. The Concert. 1. Amalfi. It was possible, Sofia Ravello would tell the Carabinieri later that day, to spend the majority of one's waking hours in another man's home, to prepare his meals and wash his sheets and sweep his floors, and to know absolutely nothing about him. The officer from the Carabinieri, whose name was Caruso, did not take issue with her statement, for the woman who had shared his bed for the last 25 years was at times a perfect stranger to him. He also knew a bit more about the victim than he had thus far revealed to the witness. The man was a murder waiting to happen. Still, Caruso insisted on a detailed statement, which Sofia was all too happy to provide. Her day began as it always did, at the dreadful hour of 5 a.m., with the bleating of her old-fashioned digital alarm clock. Having worked late the previous evening, her employer had entertained, she had granted herself 15 minutes of additional sleep before rising from her bed. She had brewed a pot of espresso with a Bialetti stovetop, then showered and dressed in her black uniform, all the while asking herself how it was that she, an attractive 24-year-old graduate of the esteemed University of Bologna, worked as a domestic servant in the home of a wealthy foreigner, rather than in a sleek office tower in Milan. The answer was that the Italian economy, reputedly the world's 8th largest, was gripped by chronically high unemployment, leaving the young and educated little choice but to go abroad in search of work. Sofia, however, was determined to remain in her native Campania, even if it required taking a job for which she was vastly overeducated. The wealthy foreigner paid her well. Indeed, she earned more than many of her friends from university, and the work itself was hardly backbreaking. Typically, she spent a not insignificant portion of her day staring at the blue-green waters of the Tyrrhenian Sea, or at the paintings in her employer's magnificent art collection. Her tiny apartment was in a crumbling building on the Via della Cartiere, in the upper reaches of the town of Amalfi. From there it was a lemon-scented walk of 20 minutes to the grandly named Palazzo Van Damme. Like most seaside estates on the Costiera Amalfitana, it was hidden behind a high wall. Sofia entered the passcode into the keypad, and the gate slid open. There was a second keypad at the entrance of the villa itself with a separate passcode. Usually the alarm system emitted a shrill chirp when Sofia opened the door, but on that morning it was silent. She did not think it odd at the time. Signora Van Damme sometimes neglected to activate the alarm before turning in. Sofia proceeded directly to the kitchen and engaged in the first task of her day, which was the preparation of Signora Van Damme's breakfast: a pot of coffee, a pitcher of steamed milk, a bowl of sugar, toasted bread with butter and strawberry preserves. She placed it on a tray, and at 7 o'clock exactly placed the tray outside his bedroom door. No, she explained to the Carabinieri, she did not enter the room, nor did she knock. She had made that mistake only once. Signora Van Damme was a precise man who demanded precision from his employees. Needless knocks on doors were discouraged, especially the door to his bedroom. It was just one of the many rules and edicts that he had transmitted to Sofia at the conclusion of the hour-long interrogation, conducted in his magnificent office that preceded her hiring. He had described himself as a successful businessman, which he had pronounced businessman. The palazzo, he said, served as both his primary residence and the nerve center of a global enterprise. He therefore required a smooth-functioning household, free of unnecessary noise and interruptions, as well as loyalty and discretion on the part of those who worked for him. Gossiping about his affairs or about the contents of his home was grounds for immediate dismissal. Sophia soon determined that her employer was the owner of a Bahamas-based shipping company called LVD Marine Transport, LVD being the acronym of his full name, which was Lucas Van Dam. She also deduced that he was a citizen of South Africa who had fled his homeland after the fall of apartheid. There was a daughter in London, an ex-wife in Toronto, and a Brazilian woman named Serafina who dropped in on him from time to time. Otherwise, he seemed unencumbered by human attachments. His paintings were all that mattered to him, the paintings that hung in every room and corridor in the villa. Thus the cameras and the motion detectors, and the nerve-jangling weekly test of the alarm, and the strict rules about gossip and unwanted interruptions. The sanctity of his office was of paramount concern. Sophia was permitted to enter the room only when Signora Van Dam was present, and she was never to open the door if it was closed. She had intruded on his privacy only once, through no fault of her own. It had happened 6 months earlier, when a man from South Africa was staying at the villa. Signora Van Dam had requested a snack of tea and biscuits to be delivered to the office, and when Sophia arrived, the door was ajar. That was when she learned of the existence of the hidden chamber, the one behind the movable bookshelves, the one where Signora Van Dam and his friend from South Africa were at that moment excitedly discussing something in their peculiar native language. Sophia told no one about what she had seen that day, least of all Signora Van Dam. She did, however, commence a private investigation of her employer, an investigation conducted mainly from within the walls of his seaside citadel. Her evidence, based largely on clandestine observation of her subject, led Sophia to the following conclusions: that Lucas Van Dam was not the successful businessman he claimed to be, that his shipping company was less than legitimate, that his money was dirty, that he had links to Italian organized crime, that he was hiding something in his past. Sophia harbored no such suspicions, however, about the woman who had come to the villa the previous evening, the attractive, raven-haired woman, mid-30s, whom Signora Van Dam had bumped into one afternoon at the terrace bar of the Santa Caterina Hotel. He had given her a rare guided tour of his art collection. Afterward, they had dined by candlelight on the terrace overlooking the sea. They were finishing the last of their wine when Sophia and the rest of the staff departed the villa at 10:30. It was Sophia's assumption that the woman was now upstairs in Signora Van Dam's bed. They had left the remnants of their dinner, a few soiled dishes, 2 garnet-stained wine glasses, outside on the terrace. Neither glass bore any trace of lipstick, which Sophia found unusual. There was nothing else out of the ordinary, save for the open door on the villa's lowest level. The likely culprit, Sophia suspected, was Signora Van Dam himself. She washed and dried the dishes carefully. A single watermark on a utensil was grounds for a reprimand, and at 8 o'clock exactly headed upstairs to collect the breakfast tray from outside Signora Van Dam's door, which was when she noticed that it had not been touched. Not his typical routine, she would tell the carabinieri, but not unprecedented either. But when Sophia found the tray undisturbed at 9 o'clock, she grew concerned. And when 10 o'clock came and went with no sign that Signora Van Dam was awake, her concern turned to alarm. By then, 2 other members of the staff, Marco Mazzetti, the villa's longtime chef, and groundskeeper Gaspare Bianchi, had arrived. Both were in agreement that the attractive young woman who had dined at the villa the previous evening was the most likely explanation for Signora Van Dam's failure to rise at his normal hour. Therefore, as men, it was their solemn advice to wait until noon before taking action. And so Sofia Ravello, 24 years old, a graduate of the University of Bologna, took up her bucket and mop and gave the floors of the villa their daily scrubbing, which in turn provided her with the opportunity to take inventory of the paintings and other objets d'art in Signora Van Dam's remarkable collection. There was nothing out of place, nothing missing, no sign that anything untoward had occurred. Nothing but the untouched breakfast tray. It was still there at noon. Sophia's first knock was tepid and received no answer. Her second, several firm blows delivered with the side of her fist, met with the same result. Finally, she placed a hand on the latch and slowly opened the door. A call to the police proved unnecessary. Her screaming, Marco Mazzetti would later say, could be heard from Salerno to Positano. 2. Canareggio. Where are you? If I'm not mistaken, I'm sitting next to my wife in the Campo di Ghetto Nuovo. Not physically, darling. She placed a finger against his forehead. Here. I was thinking. About what? Nothing at all. That's not possible. Wherever did you get an idea like that? It was a peculiar skill that Gabriel had honed in his youth. The capacity to silence all thoughts and memories, to create a private universe without sound or light or other inhabitants. It was there, in the empty quarter of his subconscious, that finished paintings had appeared to him, dazzling in their execution, revolutionary in their approach, and entirely absent of his mother's domineering influence. He had only to awaken from his trance and swiftly copy the images onto canvas before they were lost to him. Lately he had regained the power to clear his mind of sensory clutter, and with it the ability to produce satisfactory original work. Chiara's body, with its many shapes and curves, was his favorite subject matter. At present it was pressed tightly against his. The afternoon had turned cold, and a gusty wind was chasing around the perimeter of the campo. He was wearing a woolen overcoat for the first time in many months. Chiara's stylish suede jacket and chenille scarf were inadequate to the conditions. "Surely you must have been thinking about something," she insisted. "I probably shouldn't say it aloud. The old ones might never recover." The bench upon which they were seated was a few paces from the doorway of the Casa Israelitica di Riposo, a rest home for aged members of Venice's dwindling Jewish community. "Our future address," remarked Chiara, and dragged the tip of her finger through the platinum-colored hair at Gabriel's temple. It was longer than he had worn it in many years. "Some of us sooner than others. Will you visit me?" "Every day." "And what about them?" Gabriel directed his gaze toward the center of the broad square, where Irene and Raphael were engaged in a hard-fought contest of some sort with several other children from the Sestiere. The apartment buildings behind them, the tallest in Venice, were awash with the sienna light of the declining sun. "What on earth is the point of the game?" asked Chiara. "I've been asking myself the same thing." The competition involved a ball and the Campo's ancient wellhead, but otherwise its rules and scoring system were, to a non-participant, indecipherable. Irene seemed to be clinging to a narrow advantage, though her twin brother had organized a furious counterattack among the other players. The boy had been cursed with Gabriel's face and with his unusually green eyes. He also possessed an aptitude for mathematics, and recently had begun working with a private tutor. Irene, a climate alarmist who feared that Venice would soon be swallowed by the sea, had decided that Raphael should use his gifts to save the planet. She had yet to choose a career for herself. For now she enjoyed nothing more than tormenting her father. An errant kick sent the ball bounding toward the doorway of the casa. Gabriel hastened to his feet, and with a deft flick of his foot, sent the ball back into play. Then, after acknowledging the torpid applause of a heavily armed carabinieri sentry, he turned to face the 7 bas-relief panels of the ghetto's Holocaust memorial. It was dedicated to the 243 Venetian Jews, including 29 residents of the convalescent home, who were arrested in December 1943, interned in concentration camps, and later deported to Auschwitz. Among them was Adolfo Ottolenghi, the chief rabbi of Venice, who was murdered in September 1944. The current leader of the Jewish community, Rabbi Jacob Zolli, was a descendant of Sephardic Jews from Andalusia, who were expelled from Spain in 1492. His daughter was at that moment seated on a bench in the Campo di Ghetto Nuovo, watching over her 2 young children. Like the rabbi's famous son-in-law, she was a former officer of Israel's Secret Intelligence Service. She now served as the general manager of the Tiepolo Restoration Company, the most prominent such enterprise in the Veneto. Gabriel, an art conservator of international renown, was the director of the firm's paintings department, which meant that, for all intents and purposes, he worked for his wife. "What are you thinking now?" she asked. He was wondering, not for the first time, whether his mother had noticed the arrival of several thousand Italian Jews at Auschwitz, beginning in the terrible autumn of 1943. Like many survivors of the camps, she had refused to talk about the nightmare world into which she had been cast. Instead, she had recorded her testimony on a few pages of onion skin and locked it away in the file rooms of Yad Vashem. Tormented by the past and by an abiding guilt over having survived, she had been incapable of showing her only child genuine affection for fear he might be taken from her. She had bequeathed to him her ability to paint, her Berlin-accented German, and perhaps a modicum of her physical courage. And then she had left him. With each passing year, Gabriel's memories of her grew more diffuse. She was a distant figure standing before an easel, a bandage on her left forearm, her back forever turned. That was the reason Gabriel had momentarily detached himself from his wife and children. He had been trying, without success, to see his mother's face. "I was thinking," he answered, glancing at his wristwatch, "that we ought to be leaving soon." "And miss the end of the game? I wouldn't dream of it. Besides," added Chiara, "your girlfriend's concert doesn't begin until 8. It was the annual black tie gala to benefit the Venice Preservation Society, the London-based non-profit organization dedicated to the care and restoration of the city's fragile art and architecture. Gabriel had prevailed upon the renowned Swiss violinist Anna Rolf, with whom he had once had a brief romantic entanglement, to appear at the fundraiser. She had dined the previous evening at the Alon family's luxurious 4-bedroom Piano Nobile della Loggia overlooking the Grand Canal. Gabriel was only pleased that his wife, who had expertly prepared and served the meal, was once again speaking to him. She stared straight ahead, a Mona Lisa smile on her face, as he returned to the bench. "Now is the point in the conversation," she said evenly, "when you remind me that the world's most famous violinist is no longer your girlfriend. I didn't think it was necessary." "It is." "She isn't." Chiara dug a thumbnail into the back of his hand. "And you were never in love with her?" "Never," vowed Gabriel. Chiara released the pressure and gently massaged the crescent-shaped indentation in his skin. "She's bewitched your children. Irene informed me this morning that she'd like to begin studying the violin." "She's a charmer, our Anna." "She's a train wreck." "But an extremely talented one." Gabriel had attended Anna's rehearsal earlier that afternoon at Teatro La Fenice, Venice's historic opera house. He had never heard her play so well. "It's funny," said Chiara, "but she's not as pretty in person as she is on the covers of her CDs. I suppose photographers use special filters when shooting older women." "That was beneath you." "I'm allowed." Chiara issued a dramatic sigh. "Has the train wreck settled on her repertoire?" "Schumann's Violin Sonata No. 1 and the D minor Brahms." "You always loved the Brahms, especially the second movement." "Who doesn't?" "I suppose she'll make us sit through an encore of the Devil's Trill." "If she doesn't play it, there's likely to be a riot." Giuseppe Tartini's technically demanding violin sonata in G minor was Anna's signature piece. "A satanic sonata," said Chiara. "One can only imagine why your girlfriend would be drawn to a piece like that." "She doesn't believe in the devil, nor for that matter does she believe Tartini's silly story about hearing the piece in a dream." "But you don't deny that she's your girlfriend." "I believe I've been quite clear on that point." "And you were never in love with her?" "Asked and answered." Chiara leaned her head against Gabriel's shoulder. "And what about the devil?" "He's not my type." "Do you believe he exists?" "Why would you ask such a question?" "It might explain all the evil in this world of ours." She was referring, of course, to the war in Ukraine, now in its 8th month. It had been another dreadful day. More missiles directed against civilian targets in Kiev. Mass graves with hundreds of bodies discovered in the town of Izium. "Men rape and steal and murder all on their own," said Gabriel, his eyes fixed on the Holocaust memorial, "and many of the worst atrocities in human history were committed by those who were motivated not by their devotion to the evil one, but by their faith in God." "How's yours?" "My faith?" Gabriel said nothing more. "Perhaps you should talk to my father." "I talk to your father all the time." "About our work, and the children, and security at the synagogues, but not about God." "Next subject." "What were you thinking about a few minutes ago?" "I was dreaming of your fettuccine and mushrooms." "Don't make a joke about it," he answered truthfully. "You really don't remember how she looked?" "At the end. But that wasn't her." "Perhaps this will help." Rising, Chiara made her way to the center of the campo and took Irene by the hand. A moment later, the child was sitting on her father's knee, her arms around his neck. "What's wrong?" she asked, as he hurriedly wiped a tear from his cheek. Nothing, he told her. Nothing at all. 3. San Polo. By the time Irene returned to the field of play, she had fallen into 3rd place in the rankings. She lodged a formal protest, and receiving no satisfaction, withdrew to the sidelines and watched as the game dissolved into chaos and acrimony. Gabriel attempted to restore order, but to no avail. The contours of the dispute were Arab-Israeli in their complexity. Having no solution at the ready, he suggested a suspension of the tournament until the following afternoon, as the raised voices were liable to disturb the old ones in the casa. The contestants agreed, and at 4:30, peace returned to the Campo di Ghetto Nuovo. Irene and Raphael, book bags over their shoulders, scampered across the wooden footbridge on the southern edge of the square, with Gabriel and Chiara a step behind. A few centuries earlier, a Christian guard might have blocked their path, for the light was dwindling and the bridge would soon be sealed for the night. Now they strolled unmolested past gift shops and popular restaurants until they came to a small campo overlooked by a pair of opposing synagogues. Alessia Zolli, wife of the chief rabbi, waited outside the open doorway of the Levantine synagogue, which served the community in winter. The children embraced their grandmother as though it had been untold months, not 3 short days, since they had seen her last. "Remember," explained Chiara, "they need to be at school tomorrow morning by 8 o'clock at the latest." "And where is this school of theirs?" asked Alessia Zolli archly. "Is it here in Venice or on the mainland somewhere?" She looked at Gabriel and frowned. "It's your fault she's acting like this." "What have I done now?" "I'd rather not say it aloud." Alessia Zolli stroked her daughter's riotous dark hair. "The poor thing has suffered enough already." "I'm afraid my suffering has only begun." Chiara kissed the children and set off with Gabriel toward the Fondamenta Canareggio. While crossing the Ponte delle Guglie, they agreed that a light snack was in order. The recital was scheduled to conclude at 10 p.m., at which point they would repair to the Cipriani for a formal dinner with the director of the Venice Preservation Society and several deep-pocketed donors. Chiara had recently submitted bids to the group for a number of lucrative projects. She was therefore obliged to attend the dinner, even if it meant prolonging her exposure to her husband's former lover. "Where shall we go?" she asked. Gabriel's favorite baccaro in Venice was All'Arco, but it was near the Rialto fish market, and their time was running short. "How about Adagio?" he suggested. "A most unfortunate name for a wine bar, don't you think?" It was in the Campo dei Frari, near the foot of the Campanile. Inside, Gabriel ordered 2 glasses of Lombardian white and an assortment of cicchetti. Venetian culinary etiquette demanded that the small, delectable sandwiches be consumed while standing, but Chiara suggested they take a table in the square instead. The previous occupant had left behind a copy of Il Gazzettino. It was filled with photographs of the rich and celebrated, including Anna Rolf. "My first evening alone with my husband in months," said Chiara, folding the newspaper in half. "And I get to spend it with her, of all people." "Was it really necessary to further undermine my position with your mother?" "My mother thinks you walk on water." "Only during an acqua alta." Gabriel devoured a cicchetto smothered in artichoke hearts and ricotta, and washed it down with some of the vino bianco. It was his second glass of the day. Like most male residents of Venice, he had consumed un ombra with his mid-morning coffee. For the past 2 weeks, he had been frequenting a bar in Murano, where he was restoring an altarpiece by the Venetian school artist known as Il Pordenone. In his spare time, he was chipping away at 2 private commissions, as the parsimonious wages paid to him by his wife were insufficient to keep her in the manner to which she was accustomed. She was pondering the cicchetti, deliberating between the smoked mackerel and the salmon. Both lay on a bed of creamy cheese and were sprinkled with finely chopped fresh herbs. Gabriel settled the matter by snatching the mackerel. It paired beautifully with the flinty Lombardian wine. "I wanted that one," said Chiara with a pout, and reached for the salmon. "Have you given any thought as to how you're going to react tonight when someone asks whether you're that Gabriel Allon?" "I was hoping to avoid the issue entirely." "How?" "By being my usual unapproachable self." "I'm afraid that's not an option, darling. It's a social event, which means you're expected to be sociable." "I'm an iconoclast. I flout convention." he was also the world's most famous retired spy. He had settled in Venice with the approval of the Italian authorities, and with the knowledge of key figures in the Venetian cultural establishment, but his presence in the city was not widely known. For the most part, he dwelled in an uncertain realm between the overt and covert worlds. He carried a weapon, also with the approval of the Italian police, and maintained a pair of false German passports in the event he found it necessary to travel pseudonymously. Otherwise, he had shed the accoutrements of his previous life. Tonight's gala, for better or worse, would be his coming-out party. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll be perfectly charming. And if someone asks how it is you know Anna Rolf, I'll feign sudden hearing loss and make a dash for the gents." "Excellent strategy. But then operational planning always was your strong suit." A single cicchetto remained. Chiara nudged the plate toward Gabriel. "You eat it. Otherwise I won't be able to fit into my dress." "Giorgio?" "Versace." "How bad is it?" "Scandalous." "That's one way to secure funding for our projects." "Trust me, it isn't for the benefit of the donors." "You're a rabbi's daughter." "With a body that won't quit." "Tell me about it," said Gabriel, and devoured the final cicchetto. It was a pleasant 10-minute walk from the Campo dei Frari to their apartment. In the spacious master bathroom suite, Gabriel quickly showered, and then confronted his reflection in the looking-glass. He judged his appearance to be satisfactory, though marred by the raised, puckered scar on the left side of his chest. It was approximately half the size of the corresponding scar beneath his left scapula. His 2 other bullet wounds had healed nicely, as had the bite marks inflicted by an Alsatian guard dog on his left forearm. Unfortunately, he couldn't say the same for the 2 fractured vertebrae in his lower back. Faced with the prospect of a 2-hour concert followed by a multi-course seated dinner, he swallowed a prophylactic dose of Advil before heading to his dressing room. His Brioni tuxedo, a recent addition to his wardrobe, awaited him. His tailor had not found it unusual when he requested additional room in the waistline. All his trousers were cut in that manner to accommodate a concealed weapon. His preferred handgun was a Beretta 92 FS, a sizable firearm that weighed nearly 2 pounds when fully loaded. Dressed, Gabriel wedged the gun into place at the small of his back. Then, turning slightly, he examined his appearance a second time. Once again, he was mostly pleased by what he saw. The elegantly cut Brioni jacket rendered the weapon all but invisible. Moreover, the fashionable double vent would likely reduce his draw time, which, despite his many bodily injuries, remained lightning-strike fast. He strapped a Patek Philippe timepiece to his wrist, and switching off the lights, went into the sitting room to await the appearance of his wife. Yes, he thought, as he surveyed his sweeping view of the Grand Canal. He was that Gabriel Allon. Once he had been Israel's angel of vengeance. Now he was the director of the paintings department at the Tiepolo Restoration Company. Anna was someone he had encountered along the way. If the truth be told, he had tried to love her, but he wasn't capable of it. Then he met a beautiful young girl from the ghetto, and the girl saved his life. The deep thigh slit, and absence of shoulder straps notwithstanding, Chiara's black Versace evening gown was by no means scandalous. Her shoes, however, were definitely a problem. Stiletto-heeled Ferragamo pumps, they added 10.5 desirable centimeters to her already statuesque frame. She gave Gabriel a discreet downward glance as they approached the pack of press photographers gathered outside Teatro La Fenice. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked through a frozen smile. "As ready as I'll ever be," he answered, as a barrage of brilliant white flashes dazzled his eyes. They passed beneath the blue and yellow Ukrainian flag hanging from the theater's portico and entered the multilingual din of the crowded foyer. A few heads turned, but Gabriel received no excessive scrutiny. For the moment, at least, he was just another middle-aged man of uncertain nationality with a beautiful young woman on his arm. She squeezed his hand reassuringly. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" "The night is young," murmured Gabriel, and surveyed the shimmering room around him. Faded aristocrats, magnates and moguls, a smattering of important old master dealers. Tubby Oliver Dimbleby, never one to miss a good party, had made the trip down from London. He was comforting a French collector of note who had been burned to a crisp by a recent forgery scandal, the one involving the late Philip Somerset and his fraudulent art-based hedge fund, Masterpiece Art Ventures.
"Did you know he was coming?" asked Chiara.
"Oliver? I heard an alarming report to that effect from one of my many sources in the London art world. He's under strict instructions to give us a wide berth."
"What happens if he can't help himself?"
"Pretend he has leprosy, and walk away as quickly as possible." A reporter approached Oliver and solicited a comment about what heaven only knew. Several other journalists were gathered around Lorena Rinaldi, the Minister of Culture in Italy's new coalition government. Like the Prime Minister, Rinaldi belonged to a far-right political party that could trace its lineage to the national fascists of Benito Mussolini.
"At least she didn't wear her armband,"
said a male voice at Gabriel's shoulder. It belonged to Francesco Tiepolo, owner of the prominent restoration company that bore his family's famous name.
"I only wish she'd had the decency not to show her photogenic face at an event like this."
"Evidently she's a great admirer of Anna Rolf."
"Who isn't?"
"Me?"
said Chiara. Francesco smiled. An enormous bear-like man, he bore an uncanny resemblance to Luciano Pavarotti. Even now, more than a decade after the tenor's death, autograph-seeking tourists flocked to Francesco in the streets of Venice. If he was feeling mischievous, which was usually the case, he indulged them.
"Did you see the minister's interview on Rai last night?"
he asked.
"She vowed to purge Italian culture of wokeism. For the life of me, I hadn't a clue what she was talking about."
"Neither did she," said Gabriel. "It was just something she overheard during her most recent visit to America."
"We should probably take the opportunity to pay our respects."
"Why on earth would we do that?"
"Because for the foreseeable future, Lorena Rinaldi will have the final say over all major restoration projects here in Venice, regardless of who's footing the bill."
Just then the lights in the foyer dimmed, and a chime sounded. "Saved by the bell," said Gabriel, and escorted Chiara into the theater. She managed to conceal her displeasure when settling into her VIP seat in the first row.
"How lovely," she said. "I'm only sorry we're not closer to the stage."
Gabriel sat down next to her and made a small adjustment to the position of the beretta. At length he said, "I think that went rather well, don't you?"
"The night is young,"
replied Chiara, and dug a thumbnail into the back of his hand. 4. Cipriani. The Schumann was wondrous, the Brahms searchingly beautiful, but it was Anna's incendiary performance of Tartini's Devil's Trill that brought the audience to its feet. 3 dramatic curtain calls later, she bade them a final farewell. Most of the patrons filed into the Corte San Gaetano, but a select few were discreetly escorted to the theater's dock, where a flotilla of gleaming motoscafi waited to ferry them to the Cipriani Hotel. Gabriel and Chiara made the journey with a delegation of agreeable New Yorkers. None appeared to recognize the famous retired spy in their midst. The same was true of the attractive, clipboard-wielding hostess at Oro, the Cipriani's celebrated restaurant.
"Ah, yes, here you are, Signora Alon, table number 5. Signora Zolli is at table 1, the head table,"
the hostess added with a smile. "That's because Signora Zolli is much more important than I am." The hostess gestured toward the entrance of the restaurant's private dining room, and Gabriel followed Chiara inside.
"Please tell me they didn't seat me next to her," she said.
"The minister? I believe she had to rush off to a book burning."
"I was referring to Anna."
"Play nicely," said Gabriel, and set off in search of his table. He arrived to find 4 of the New Yorkers from the water taxi. They were outliers, the Americans. The rest of the crowd was decidedly British. Gabriel located his assigned seat and, resisting the urge to drop the place card into the nearest shredder, sat down. "I didn't catch your name earlier," said one of the Americans, a ginger-haired specimen of perhaps 65 who looked as though he ate too much red meat. "It's Gabriel Alon." "Sounds familiar. What do you do?" "I'm a conservator." "Really? I was afraid I would be the only one here." "Conservator," repeated Gabriel, stressing the final syllable. "An art restorer." "Have you restored anything recently?" "I did some work on one of the Tintorettos in the Church of the Madonna dell'Orto not long ago." "I believe I paid for that entire project." "You believe?" "Saving Venice is my wife's hobby, To tell you the truth, Art bores the shit out of me."
Gabriel checked the place card to his right and was relieved to see that he had been seated next to the heiress to a British supermarket fortune, who, if the London tabloids were to be believed, had recently tried to murder her philandering husband with a butcher's knife. Curiously, the card corresponding to the seat on his left was blank. Looking up, he spotted the heiress, a well-preserved woman in a striking red gown, approaching the table. Her chemically enhanced face displayed no trace of surprise, or any other emotion for that matter, when he introduced himself. "For the record," she said, "it was only a paring knife, and the wound, such as it was, required no sutures." Smiling, she took her seat. "Who are you, Mr. Alon? And what on earth are you doing here?"
"He's a conservator," interjected the American. "He restored one of the Tintorettos in Madonna dell'Orto. My wife and I paid for it."
"And we're all very grateful," breathed the heiress. Then turning to Gabriel, she said, "Who do I have to kill around here to get a beefeater and tonic?" Gabriel started to reply, but fell silent when a swell of applause rose from the neighboring tables. "The enchanting Madame Rolfe," observed the heiress. "She's mad as a hatter. At least, that's what they say." Gabriel allowed the remark to pass without comment. "Her mother committed suicide, you know, and then there was that terrible scandal involving her father and those paintings that were looted by the Nazis during the war. Anna's life went off the rails after that. How many failed marriages were there? 3? Or was it 4? 2, I believe. And let's not forget the accident that almost ended her career," said the heiress, undeterred. "I'm afraid I can't recall the details."
A hillside gave way in a rainstorm while she was hiking near her home on the Costa de Prata. Her left hand was crushed by a falling boulder. It took months of rehabilitation for her to regain use of it.
"It sounds to me as though you're an admirer, Mr. Alon."
"You might say that."
"Forgive me, I hope I haven't spoken out of turn."
"Oh, no," said Gabriel. "I've never had the honor of actually meeting her."
There seemed to be some confusion over where Anna was to sit. Each of the 8 seats at the head table was occupied. So too was every other chair in the dining room, with one exception. No, thought Gabriel, glancing at the blank place card. She wouldn't dare. "Well, well," said the heiress, as the world's most famous violinist approached the table. "It looks as though this is your lucky night."
"Imagine that," replied Gabriel, and rose slowly to his feet.
Anna accepted his outstretched hand as though it belonged to a stranger, and smiled mischievously when he spoke his name. "Not that, Gabriel Alon," she said, and sat down.
"How did you manage this?"
"In lieu of my usual exorbitant appearance fee, I made a single non-negotiable demand regarding the seating arrangements for tonight's après-concert soirée." She offered an overbright smile to a patron at a neighboring table. "God, but I hate these things. One wonders why I agreed to this."
"Because you couldn't resist the opportunity to cause problems in my home."
"My intentions were honorable, I assure you."
"Were they really?"
"Mostly." Anna lowered her eyes apprehensively toward the plate that a white-jacketed waiter had placed before her. "What in God's name is it?"
"Cuttlefish," explained Gabriel. "A local delicacy.
The last time I ate an uncooked creature from the lagoon, I was paralyzed for a week."
"It's divine."
"When in Rome," said Anna, and tentatively sampled the dish. "How much money did we raise tonight?"
"Nearly 10 million. But if you play footsie with that wealthy American on the other side of the table, 20 million isn't out of the question."
Presently, the wealthy American was staring wide-eyed at his phone. "Does he know who you are?" asked Anna.
"I have a feeling he does now."
"What do you suppose he's thinking?"
"Why is the retired chief of Israeli intelligence sitting next to Anna Rolfe, of all people?"
"Shall we tell him?"
"I'm not sure he would believe the story."
It began when Gabriel accepted what he thought was a routine commission to restore a painting at the Zurich residence of the immensely wealthy Swiss banker Augustus Rolfe. The tragic ending took place some months later, and Gabriel walked out of the villa in Portugal where Herr Rolfe's famous daughter had taken refuge from her family's deplorable past. He'd always regretted his conduct that day, and the 20 years during which he and Anna had exchanged not a single phone call or email. Familial complications notwithstanding, he was pleased she was once again a part of his life. "You might have warned me," she said suddenly.
"About what?"
She directed her gaze toward the head table, where all eyes were on Chiara. "Your wife's astonishing beauty. It was quite a shock last night when I met her for the first time."
"I believe I mentioned a vague resemblance to Nicola Benedetti."
"My dear friend Nicola wishes she looked like Chiara," Anna sighed. "I suppose she's perfect in every way."
"She's a much better cook than you. And better yet, she doesn't practice the violin at all hours."
"Has she ever hurt you?" Gabriel pointed out the faint red mark on the back of his hand. "I never stood a chance of getting you back, did I?"
"You made it abundantly clear when I left Portugal that you never wanted to speak to me again."
"I suppose you're referring to the lamp I accidentally knocked from the end table."
"It was a ceramic vase, and you hurled it directly at my head with your remarkably strong right arm."
"Consider yourself lucky. The gentlewoman seated next to you would have come after you with something far more lethal."
"She swears it was only a paring knife."
"There were photographs." Anna nudged her plate toward the center of the table.
"You don't care for it?"
"I'm flying to London first thing. I'd rather not take a chance."
"I thought you were staying in Venice for a few days."
"Last-minute change in plan. I'm recording the Mendelssohn next week with Yannick Nézet-Séguin and the Chamber Orchestra of Europe, and I desperately need a few days of rehearsal."
"The children will be disappointed, Anna. They adore you."
"And I them. But I'm afraid it can't be helped. Yannick was quite insistent I come to London straight away. I'm thinking about having a disastrous affair while I'm there, something that will get my name back in the gossip columns where it belongs."
"You'll only get hurt again."
"But I'll play better as a result. You know me, Gabriel. I never play well when I'm happy."
"You were magnificent tonight, Anna."
"Was I?" She squeezed his hand. "I wonder why."
5. Murano. It was Chiara, on something of a dare, who had suggested that Gabriel paint a copy of Reclining Nude, Modigliani's controversial masterwork that in 2015 fetched $170 million at Christie's auction house in New York. Pleased by his effort, he had then executed an altogether convincing pastiche of Modigliani's original. A change of perspective, a subtle rearrangement of the woman's pose, if only to demonstrate his ability, were he ever so inclined, to earn his living as an art forger. On the morning after the gala, he awoke to find both canvases awash in the morning light, slanting through the tall windows overlooking the Grand Canal. It was dull and grey, the light, much like the pain between Gabriel's eyes. It had nothing to do with the red wine he had drunk with his midnight supper, he assured himself. Rainy mornings in Venice always made his head ache. He rose slowly so as not to wake Chiara, and surveyed the damage from last evening's post-gala proceedings. A trail of hastily discarded Italian formal wear and other assorted furnishings stretched from the doorway to the foot of the bed. A Brioni tuxedo and shirt, a strapless evening gown with a deep thigh slit by Versace, stiletto-heeled pumps, and patent-leather derby Oxfords by Salvatore Ferragamo, gold studs and cufflinks, a timepiece by Patek Philippe, a 92 FS 9mm pistol by Fabbrica d'Armi Pietro Beretta. The act had been completed swiftly, with little regard for preliminaries. Chiara had gazed down at Gabriel proprietarily throughout, a half-smile on her face. The rival had been vanquished, the demon exorcised. In the kitchen, Gabriel filled the automatico with illy and bottled water, and reviewed the coverage of the gala in Il Gazzettino while waiting for the coffee to brew. The paper's music critic had found much to admire in Anna's recital, especially her encore, which had somehow managed to eclipse her legendary performance of the same piece 2 decades earlier at the Scuola Grande di San Rocco. In none of the accompanying photographs was there any evidence of Gabriel's presence at the event. Only a single image of his right shoulder, upon which rested the hand of Chiara Zolli, the dazzling general manager of the Tiepolo Restoration Company. She was still sleeping soundly when Gabriel returned to the bedroom with 2 cups of coffee. Her position was unchanged. She was supine, with her arms above her head. Even unconscious, thought Gabriel, she was a work of art. He tugged at the duvet, exposing her heavy, rounded breasts, and took up his sketch-pad. 10 minutes elapsed before the scratching of his charcoal pencil awakened her.
"Must you?" she groaned.
"I must.
I look awful."
"I beg to differ."
"Coffee?" she pleaded.
"It's on your bedside table, but you can't have it yet."
"Don't you have a painting to restore?"
"I'd rather sketch you."
"You're already behind schedule."
"I'm always behind schedule."
"Which is why I should fire you."
"I'm irreplaceable."
"This is Italy, darling. There are more art restorers in this country than waiters."
And the waiters earn better wages.
Chiara reached for the duvet. "Don't move," said Gabriel. "I'm cold."
"Yes, I can see that."
Chiara returned to her original pose. "Did you ever paint her?"
"Anna? Never.
She refused to sit for you?"
Actually, she begged me to paint her.
"Why didn't you?"
"I was afraid of what I might find there."
"You don't really believe she needs to rehearse the Mendelssohn violin concerto?"
"She can play it in her sleep."
"So why is she leaving?"
"I'll show you in a few minutes."
"You have exactly 10 seconds. Gabriel snapped her photograph with his Israeli-made Solaris phone, the world's most secure. "Reprobate," said Chiara, and reached for her coffee. 1 hour later, showered and dressed and cloaked in oilskin coats against the gentle rain, they stood side by side at the Embarcadero of the San Tomás Vaporetto stop. Chiara's San Marco-bound number 2 arrived first.
"Are you free for lunch?"
asked Gabriel. She fixed him with a stare of reproach. "You can't be serious."
"It was the sketch."
"I'll think about it," she said, and boarded the Vaporetto.
"Well?"
he called out, as the vessel drew away from the dock. "I might be free at 1.
"I'll pick up something to eat."
"Don't bother," she replied, and blew him a kiss. A number 1 was approaching San Tomás from the direction of the university. Gabriel rode it to the Rialto, then hiked across Canareggio to the Fondamente Nove, where he quickly downed a coffee at Bar Cupido before boarding his next Vaporetto, a number 4. It made a single stop along the western flank of San Michele, the island of the dead, then headed for Murano. Gabriel disembarked at Museo, the second of the island's 2 stops, and walked past the glass shops lining the Fondamenta Venier to the church of Santa Maria degli Angeli. There had been a Christian place of worship on the site since 1188, but the current structure, with its listing bell tower and khaki-colored brick exterior, dated to 1529. In the late 18th century, a philosopher and adventurer who associated with the likes of Mozart and Voltaire had regularly attended Mass there. It was not faith that drew the man to the church, for he had none. He came in hopes of a fleeting encounter with a beautiful young nun who resided in the adjoining convent. The man, whose name was Giacomo Casanova, had many such relationships, hundreds, in fact, though he carefully guarded the identity of his secret lover from the convent. In his memoirs, he identified the woman, rumored to be the daughter of a Venetian aristocrat, only as M.M. There were others like her at the convent, daughters of the Republic's wealthiest citizens, so the abbess was rarely short of funds. She nevertheless balked when a popular painter, who would one day be known as Titian, demanded 500 ducats for a depiction of the Annunciation that he had produced for the church's high altar. Offended, Titian gave the painting to Isabella, wife of Charles V, and the abbess hired Il Pordenone, a ruthlessly ambitious mannerist who had been accused of hiring assassins to kill his brother, to produce a replacement. Pordenone undoubtedly leapt at the opportunity, for he viewed himself as Titian's most serious artistic rival in Venice. Titian's original altarpiece disappeared without a trace during the Napoleonic Wars, but Pordenone's lesser work survived. At present it was secured to a purpose-built wooden armature in the center of the nave. On the wall behind the high altar was a black rectangle of corresponding dimensions where once the canvas had hung, and where it would hang again when the extensive restoration of the ancient church was complete. Adriana Zinetti, perched atop a towering scaffold, was removing a century's worth of dust and grime from the ornate marble frame. She wore a zippered fleece jacket and fingerless gloves. The interior of the church was cold as a crypt. "Buongiorno, signore Del Vecchio," she sang, as Gabriel switched on a portable space heater. It was the cover identity he had used during much of his previous life. Mario Del Vecchio, the standoffish, temperamental genius who had served his apprenticeship in Venice with the great Umberto Conti and restored many of the city's most famous paintings. Adriana, a renowned cleaner of altars and statuary, had worked with Mario on several major projects. When not trying to seduce him, she had loathed him with a particular intensity. "I was beginning to worry about you," she said. "You're always the first to arrive."
"A late night,"
he replied, and scrutinized his work trolley. The telltales he had left behind the previous afternoon remained undisturbed. Still, one never knew.
"You didn't touch anything, did you?"
"Everything, Mario. I put my grabby little fingers all over your precious flasks and solvents." You really have to stop calling me that, you know.
A part of me misses him.
I'm sure he feels the same about you.
And what if I had touched your things? She asked. Would the world have come to an end?
It might well have, yes.
He removed his coat.
To what shall we listen, Signora Zinetti?
Amy Winehouse.
How about Schubert instead?
Not the string quartets again. If I have to listen to Death and the Maiden one more time, I'll jump.
Gabriel inserted a disc into his paint-smudged CD player. Maurizio Pollini's classic recording of Schubert's late piano sonatas, and then wound a swatch of cotton wool around the end of a wooden dowel. Next, he dipped the swab into a carefully calibrated mixture of acetone, methylproxetol, and mineral spirits, and twirled it gently over the surface of the altarpiece. The solvent was strong enough to remove the yellowed varnish, but not Portenone's original work. The acrid smell invaded Adriana's workspace.
You really should wear a mask, she admonished him. In all the years we've worked together, I've never once seen you put one on. I can't imagine how many brain cells you've killed off.
My missing brain cells are the least of my problems.
Name one problem you have, Mario.
An altar cleaner who insists on talking while I'm trying to work.
Gabriel's swab had turned the color of nicotine. He discarded it and prepared another. A fortnight into the restoration, he had cleaned nearly the entire lower third of the painting. The losses were extensive, but hardly catastrophic. It was Gabriel's ambition to complete the final stage of the restoration, the retouching, in 4 months' time, at which point he would turn his attention to the remaining works adorning the nave. Antonio Politti, a long-time employee of the Tiepolo Restoration Company, had already begun work on one of the canvases, The Virgin in Glory with Saints, by Palma il Giovane. It was nearly 10:30 when he sauntered into the church.
"Buongiorno, Signore del Vecchio,"
he called out. From atop the high altar came the sound of laughter. Gabriel removed the disc from his CD player and inserted a recording of Schubert's String Quartet No. 14 in D minor. Then he pulled on his oilskin coat and, smiling, went into the damp morning. 6. Bar al Ponte. The parcel that arrived at the Naples office of the Carabinieri on a stifling August morning in 1988 was by all outward appearances harmless, which was not the case. It contained a small but powerful bomb, assembled by a member of the Calabrian criminal organization known as the Camorra. The addressee, General Cesare Ferrari, had been targeted several times before, most recently after the arrest of one of the Camorra's highest-ranking figures. The mailroom attendant nevertheless delivered the package to the general's office. Ferrari would survive the explosion, but lose his right eye and 2 fingers from his right hand. A year later, he personally escorted the Camorrista responsible for the attack into Poggioreale prison and bade him a not-so-fond farewell. There were some who considered him ill-suited for his next assignment, and perhaps a touch too brash, but General Ferrari thought otherwise. Brazenness, he insisted, was precisely what the art squad required. Known formally as the Division for the Defense of Cultural Patrimony, it was the first of its kind. A police unit dedicated exclusively to combating the lucrative trade in stolen art and antiquities. The first 2 decades of its existence had produced thousands of arrests and a string of high-profile recoveries. But by the mid-1990s, institutional paralysis had set in. Manpower had dwindled to a few retirement-age officers, most of whom knew little or nothing about art. It was said by the unit's legion of detractors, not without some justification, that they spent more time debating where to have lunch than searching for the museum's worth of paintings that went missing in Italy each year. Within days of assuming command of the art squad, General Ferrari fired half the staff and replaced them with aggressive young officers who knew a thing or two about the objects they were attempting to find. He also sought authority to tap the phones of known criminal operatives and opened offices in the parts of the country where the thieves actually stole art, especially in the South. Most important, he adopted many of the techniques he had used against the mafia during his days in Naples, targeting big fish rather than merely street-level hoods who dabbled in art theft. His approach quickly paid dividends. Under General Ferrari's leadership, the Division for the Defense of Cultural Patrimony had regained its lost luster. Even the art sleuths of the French Police Nationale were the first to admit that their Italian brethren were the best in the business. They were headquartered in an ornate yellow and white palazzo in Rome's Piazza di Sant'Ignazio. The 3 officers were based in Venice. When not searching for stolen works of art, they kept a close eye on the director of the paintings department at the Tiepolo Restoration Company. Lately, he had been taking his mid-morning coffee break at Bar al Ponte, so named because of its proximity to one of Murano's busiest bridges. He arrived there to find General Ferrari, in his blue and gold carabinieri finery, occupying a table in the back corner of the room. He smiled at Gabriel over that morning's edition of Il Gazzettino.
"You've become a creature of habit."
"My wife tells me the same thing," replied Gabriel, and sat down.
"She made quite an impression at last evening's gala."
The general laid the newspaper flat on the table and pointed to a photograph in the Cultura section.
"But who's that out-of-focus chap standing next to her?"
"An afterthought."
"I wouldn't go that far. It's safe to say your presence in Venice is no longer a secret."
"I couldn't hide forever, Cesare."
"How does it feel to be a normal person again after all these years?"
"Let's not get carried away. I'm not exactly normal."
"You certainly have interesting friends. I'm only sorry I wasn't able to attend Signora Roll's performance."
"Don't worry. The Minister of Culture was good enough to put in an appearance."
"You behaved yourself, I hope?"
"We got on famously. In fact, she invited me to next week's Leni Riefenstahl Film Festival." General Ferrari's smile was courtly and brief. As usual, it had no influence upon his prosthetic right eye.
"I'm afraid that our politics are no laughing matter. 100 years after the rise of Mussolini, the Italian people have once again handed power to the fascists."
"The Fratelli d'Italia consider themselves to be neo-fascists."
"What's the difference?"
"Better uniforms."
"And no castor oil,"
added General Ferrari, then shook his head slowly.
"How in God's name did we come to this?"
"Things fall apart," recited Gabriel. "The center cannot hold."
"Did Virgil write that, or was it Ovid?"
"I believe it was David Bowie," quipped Gabriel. The barman delivered 2 coffees to the table, and for Gabriel, a small glass of white wine. General Ferrari pondered his wristwatch.
"You Venetians really do know how to live."
"Too much coffee makes my hands shake. A few drops of vino bianco counteract the effects of the caffeine."
"You never struck me as the sort to have shaky hands."
"It happens from time to time, especially when I have the nagging sensation that an old friend is about to impose on me for a favor."
"And if he were?"
"I would tell him that an altarpiece awaits."
"Il Pordenone is beneath you."
"But he pays the bills."
"And what if I were to offer you something more interesting?"
The general adopted the meditative countenance of Bellini's Doge Leonardo Loredan.
"There was a spectacular wave of art heists here in Europe a few years ago. The newspapers referred to it as the Summer of Theft. The first took place in Vienna. The thieves recruited a disgruntled security guard at the Kunsthistorisches and made off with David with the Head of Goliath by your old friend Caravaggio. I'm sure you recall it."
"It rings a distant bell," replied Gabriel.
"The very next month," General Ferrari continued, "they stole Portrait of Signora Canals from the Museo Picasso in Barcelona. A week later, Les Maisons, Fenouet, vanished from the Musée Matisse. And then, of course, there was the textbook smash-and-grab job they pulled at the Courtauld Gallery. Once again, they helped themselves to but a single painting."
"Self-Portrait with Bandaged Ear," by Vincent van Gogh. Ferrari nodded.
"As you might imagine, my European colleagues have been searching high and low for these irreplaceable works of art, without success. Now, quite unexpectedly, it appears that one of them has resurfaced."
"Where?"
"Here in Italy, of all places."
"Which one?"
"I'm not at liberty to say."
"Why ever not?"
"The painting was discovered late yesterday afternoon by another division of the Carabinieri. If it is indeed the work in question, I will contact the relevant authorities and begin the process of repatriation."
"Is there some doubt?"
"It certainly looks like the genuine article," said General Ferrari. "But as you know, the art market is awash with high-quality forgeries. Needless to say, it would be most embarrassing if we were to announce the rediscovery of a missing painting only to have it turn out to be a fake. We have a reputation to uphold."
"What does any of this have to do with me?"
"I was wondering whether you knew someone who could assist us, someone whose expertise runs the gamut from Caravaggio to Van Gogh, someone who could walk into an art gallery in, say, Paris, and spot several forgeries within a matter of minutes."
"I know just the expert," said Gabriel. "But I'm afraid he's rather busy at the moment.
I would advise him to find time in his schedule.
Is that a threat?
Just a friendly reminder that you are a guest in this country, and I am the innkeeper.
It was General Ferrari, in his capacity as chief of the art squad, who had arranged for Gabriel to receive a permesso di soggiorno, a permanent Italian residence permit. Revocation of the document would threaten his livelihood, not to mention his marriage.
A simple authentication. That's all you require?
Ferrari shrugged noncommittally.
Where is the painting now?
In situ.
Where in situ?
Amalfi.
If we leave now, you'll be home in time for a late dinner with Chiara.
Will I? Probably not. In fact, it might be wise to pack a bag.
Gun or no gun?
Gun,
said General Ferrari.
Definitely. Bring a gun.
7. Amalfi. While crossing the laguna in a Carabinieri patrol boat, Gabriel considered how best to explain the morning's developments to Chiara. He reflected upon the matter further while changing into suitable attire and tossing a change of clothing into his overnight bag. In the end, he decided to employ a version of the general's original fiction, that the art squad required his connoisseur's eye to authenticate a recovered stolen painting. He spun this tale by text message because he no longer possessed the ability to lie convincingly to his wife using any other form of communication. She accepted his story without question, including his false assertion that he would be back in Venice in time for late dinner. If anything, she seemed relieved that her hopelessly amorous husband would be away for a few hours. The patrol boat ferried them next to the airport, where they boarded an Augusta Westland AW-109 helicopter. With a cruising speed of 285 kilometers per hour, it covered the distance down to Naples in just under 3 hours. They made the winding trip over the hills of the Sorrento Peninsula, with its nausea-inducing switchbacks and hairpin turns in a Carabinieri Alfa Romeo, piloted, surely, by an aspiring Formula One driver. It was 2:30 when he turned through the open security gate of a palatial cliffside villa overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea. 3 additional Carabinieri cruisers were parked in the forecourt, along with a crime scene van.
Nice crib, said Gabriel.
Wait until you see the interior.
Who's the owner?
A South African named Lucas Van Dam.
What does he do for a living?
Until recently, Signore Van Dam was in the shipping business.
I'm obviously in the wrong line of work.
That makes 2 of us.
Gabriel followed the general through the villa's grand entrance. A luminous gallery stretched before them, lined on both sides with pedestaled vases and vessels and Greek and Roman statuary. On the whitewashed walls hung a remarkable collection of old master paintings of every school and genre. At the opposite end of the gallery, a doorway was open wide to the freshening afternoon breeze. The sun had yet to begin its descent toward the turquoise sea. Gabriel approached one of the antiquities, an Etruscan terracotta amphora, and consulted the art squad evidence tag dangling from the handle.
The Paris painter?
So it appears,
said General Ferrari.
That piece belongs in a museum rather than a private residence. Thus far, we've been unable to determine where Signore Van Dam acquired it.
Where is he now?
Naples.
In custody?
More or less,
said the general, with an apathetic shrug. Adjacent to the amphora was a large Bacchic scene that bore the hallmarks of the French Baroque artist Nicolas Poussin. And next to the Bacchic scene was a landscape that might or might not have been painted by the hand of Claude Lorraine. Both were in immaculate condition, as was the rest of the collection.
There are paintings and objets d'art of similar quality throughout the property, said General Ferrari. Some better than others.
Where might we find those?
The general indicated a pair of ornate lacquered doors. Beyond them lay the spacious, light-filled office of a man who quite obviously held himself in high regard. 2 Carabinieri officers were rifling through the contents of the desk, and a third was downloading files from a computer onto a remote storage device. It was this officer, when prompted by General Ferrari, who pressed the concealed button that initiated the motorized outward swinging movement of 2 solidly built bookcases. Behind them was a stainless steel door, like the door of a bank vault, and a keypad.
The better ones?
asked Gabriel.
I'll let you be the judge.
The experts had long called into question his very existence. There was no such thing, they said, as the mysterious, wealthy collector who acquires illegally what he cannot purchase legitimately on the open market. He was a fantasy of fertile Hollywood imaginations, they claimed. A myth. They even had a name for him. They called him Dr. No, the cartoonish title character of Ian Fleming's spy thriller featuring British secret agent James Bond. Gabriel, however, had never fallen victim to such misconceptions. Yes, many art thefts were carried out by common criminals who had no idea how to profitably dispose of a painting once it was in their hands, but there was also a thriving black market for stolen art that catered to men who were driven to possess the unpossessable. By all outward appearances, Lucas Van Damme was such a man. His vault was approximately 3 meters by 4, and decorated in the formal manner of an exhibition room at a commercial art gallery. There was a single Eames chair, which was oriented toward the room's only painting. Self-portrait with bandaged ear, oil on canvas, 60 by 49 centimeters, by Vincent van Gogh. Of more interest to Gabriel, however, was the empty frame and stretcher, 70 by 65 centimeters, give or take a centimeter or two, leaning against one wall. 20 or so copper-plated canvas tacks littered the floor. He looked to General Ferrari for an explanation.
We believe it was stolen 2 nights ago, but we can't say for certain. It appears as though the thief gained access to the vault by hacking into the villa's Wi-Fi network. The entire security system was disabled, and all of the video has been erased.
What makes you think it was 2 nights ago?
More on that in a moment. The question is, said Ferrari, why would a thief steal that painting, and not one of the most famous works of art in existence?
I can think of 2 possible explanations.
The first?
The Van Gogh isn't a Van Gogh.
The fact that it's hidden in a vault would suggest that it is.
So stipulated.
And the second explanation?
The Van Gogh is a Van Gogh, but it wasn't worth stealing.
And why would that be?
Because the other painting was more valuable. Gabriel lowered his voice. Much more.
How much, hypothetically speaking, of course, would self-portrait with bandaged ear fetch at auction? 200 million? 250?
In the shade.
Is there another missing painting worth more than that?
Only one.
First things first, said General Ferrari. Is it, or is it not, Self-Portrait with Bandaged Ear by Vincent van Gogh?
Gabriel placed a hand to his chin and tilted his head to one side. It was the right ear, of course, that was encased in the heavy dressing. Vincent had taken a razor to it on the evening of December 23, 1888, following a heated quarrel with Paul Gauguin in the Yellow House in Arles. He had produced the self-portrait after his release from the hospital in January 1889. In his haste to complete the work, he had failed to apply paint to portions of the canvas, including a patch beneath his cheekbone and another where the collar of his woolen coat fell against the side of his neck. The bare spots in the painting before Gabriel were identical to the ones on the painting that had been stolen from the Courtauld gallery. They were Vincent's bare spots, thought Gabriel. So were the brushstrokes.
Well?
Asked Gabriel Ferrari after a long moment. I should probably have a look at the back of the canvas just to be certain.
But it isn't necessary?
No, said Gabriel, and turned his attention once more toward the empty frame and stretcher leaning against the wall, and the 20 or so copper-plated canvas tacks littering the floor. No razor for this thief, he thought. It was the mark of a professional, and a cool one at that. He reached for the stretcher.
Don't,
said General Ferrari.
Not unless you'd like us to take a set of elimination prints from you.
Gabriel withdrew his hand.
How old is it?
Asked Ferrari.
The stretcher?
20 years, maybe less. It's laminated pine, with a 5/8 setback. Quite common. It could have come from any artist supply shop in Europe.
The measurements suggest it was custom-made to someone's exact specifications.
72.5 by 64.7 centimeters. Ferrari nodded.
You wouldn't happen to know a missing painting of those dimensions that's worth more than Self-Portrait with Bandaged Ear by Vincent van Gogh, would you?
Only one, said Gabriel.
I thought so too.
The general smiled.
Would you like to go back to Venice now? Or should we have a look at the rest of the crime scene?
8. Amalfi. Upstairs, Gabriel stood at the foot of Lucas Van Damme's bed and extended his right arm.
Bang,
he said softly.
Actually,
said General Ferrari,
there were 2 shots, and the killer undoubtedly used a suppressor.
Gabriel lowered his arm.
Caliber? 9mm.
Shell casings?
None.
Where was the victim shot?
The victim,
repeated the general,
was shot twice in the head. The first round was recovered from the wall behind the headboard. The trajectory indicates the killer was standing exactly where you are now.
And the second shot?
Point blank.
Just to make sure.
So it would seem.
Time of death?
Sometime between midnight and 4 a.m.
Sign of a struggle?
No.
Defensive wound to the hand? The general shook his head. He was sleeping?
The forensic experts think he was.
Toxicology report?
Not yet.
Gabriel gazed down at the blood-soaked bedding. Theory of the case?
Thief kills Van Damme, thief steals painting.
How did the thief get into the villa? Ferrari smiled.
Thief was invited to dinner.
At a table outside on the immense terrace, with the sea rising and falling against the base of the cliff below, General Ferrari popped the latches on his attaché case and withdrew a manila file. Its contents included a surveillance image captured by a security camera at the nearby Santa Caterina Hotel. A dark-haired woman in her mid-30s was seated at a table at the hotel's popular bar. She was conversing with the late Lucas Van Damme.
She arrived in Amalfi in September and took out a 6-month lease on a villa.
Ferrari rotated a few degrees in his chair and pointed out a small dwelling, white as bone, anchored to the cliff above Van Damme's property.
In case you're wondering, she paid in cash. Called herself Ursula Roth. Said she was German. Told her housekeeper and anyone else who would listen that she was working on a novel. The night before last, she accepted Van Damme's invitation to dinner.
Did the forensic team find any evidence of sexual activity?
None.
What about hair? General Ferrari shook his head. Not to belabor the point, said Gabriel, but there's no evidence of sexual activity, and no evidence the woman was ever in Van Damme's bed. Is that what you're suggesting?
That appears to be the case.
Gabriel looked down at the photograph. Is this the only one?
It's the best we've found so far. She seems to have a knack for avoiding cameras, and for cleaning up after herself, added Ferrari. She wiped down every surface of her villa before leaving. There are no fingerprints here either, at least none we've been able to find.
What about a vehicle?
A Volkswagen Passat estate car, Munich registration. We were able to track her movements on the autostrada. She reached Florence shortly before sunrise yesterday and promptly disappeared from the grid.
The sun rose at approximately 7:30 yesterday, if I'm not mistaken.
You're not.
And it's a 5-hour drive from Amalfi to Florence, which means she probably left around 2 in the morning.
Well within the window of the estimated time of death.
But there's just one problem with your theory of the case, General Ferrari.
And what's that?
Art thieves rarely kill people, especially an art thief who charms her way into the victim's home and allows herself to be seen by his household staff.
In that case, who killed Van Damme?
The man with a silenced 9mm handgun who entered the villa after the thief left. As for the painting in the vault room, said Gabriel, you can return it to the Courtauld Gallery with complete confidence that it's the missing Van Gogh.
Actually, I'm inclined to retain possession of it for the foreseeable future.
But surely you plan to tell the Metropolitan Police that you found it?
Not any time soon, no.
Why not?
Because alerting the British authorities will only make it harder for you to find the painting that the thief so carefully pried from that custom-made stretcher measuring 72.5 by 64.7 centimeters.
Isn't that your job?
Finding stolen paintings? Technically speaking, yes. But you're much better at it than we are, especially in cases involving thieves who aren't Italian. If I were you, I'd start by showing that photograph to some of my contacts on the dirty side of the art trade.
The general paused, then added,
The dirtier, the better.
Gabriel did not bother to refute General Ferrari's assertion regarding his links to certain unsavory elements of the art world. In his previous life, he had sometimes found it necessary to associate with such creatures, and on occasion to commit crimes against art himself, some spectacular, others less so. In the process, he had managed to recover numerous stolen or looted paintings, including Caravaggio's Nativity with St. Francis and St. Lawrence. He had made certain that General Ferrari and the art squad received the credit.
And if my contacts prove unaccommodating, asked Gabriel, you will squeeze them until they see the error of their ways. And you will do it quickly, added Ferrari. The fact that she left behind a Van Gogh would suggest that she stole the painting at the behest of a wealthy client, which means you have a limited amount of time to find it before it disappears again. A few days at most. How much leeway do I have to make a deal? Considerable. How considerable? Pressed Gabriel. In order to recover one of only 34 surviving works by one of the greatest painters who ever lived, I'd be willing to overlook almost anything. A dead body? General Ferrari shrugged. Lucas Van Damme was hardly a pillar of our expatriate community. Anything specific? A close business relationship with a certain notorious criminal organization based in Calabria. 'Ndrangheta? Ferrari nodded. As you know, the 'Ndrangheta are the primary European distributors for the South American drug cartels. And for the past decade or so, LVD Marine Transport has served as the transatlantic conveyor belt. Wonderful, said Gabriel. Is there anything else you'd like to tell me before I begin my investigation? Thief killed Van Damme. Thief stole painting. Not a chance. All right, said Ferrari. Let's hear your theory of the case. Gabriel looked down at the photograph of the woman sitting at the terrace bar of the Santa Catarina Hotel. Thief didn't know the score when she took the job. Thief is in over her pretty little head. 9. Rue de Méroménil. There was an ITA Airways flight to Paris leaving Fiumicino at 8:30. With General Ferrari's assistance, Gabriel was permitted to sidestep the body screeners at security. He rang Chiara from the departure gate. You'll never guess where I am. I know exactly where you are, darling. More important, I know where you're going. How is that possible? I just got off the phone with the general. You're not angry? A little, she admitted. But I'm prepared to grant you a few days' leave to pursue the matter. Unpaid, of course. How generous of you. You will be careful, won't you? I promise not to visit any art galleries. You're staying somewhere dreadful, I hope? Actually, I was planning to borrow a friend's pied-à-terre. The friend was the Swiss billionaire venture capitalist Martin Landesmann, and his luxurious pied-à-terre was located on the Ile Saint-Louis. Gabriel had utilized the apartment as well as the services of Martin's ethically challenged Geneva-based firm during his last major operation as chief of the office. How long do you need it? Asked Martin. 2 nights. 3 at the most. Not a problem. I'll have my property manager stock the fridge. I believe there's a bottle or 2 of Chateau Petrus in the wine cooler. Your life will never be the same. Gabriel drank a glass of the extraordinary Pomerol wine late that evening with the poulet rôti and haricots verts he ate for his supper. He passed a restful night in Martin's guest room, and at 9:15 the following morning he was walking along the pavements of the Rue de Méroménil in the 8th arrondissement. At the northern end of the street was a shop called Antiquités Scientifiques. Its proprietor, a man named Maurice Durand, was drinking a café crème across the street at Brasserie Dumas. Gabriel joined the Frenchman uninvited and, signaling the waiter, ordered a coffee for himself. Durand folded his copy of Le Monde with inordinate care and placed it on the table. He wore a tailored suit, undertaker grey, with a striped dress shirt and a lavender necktie. His bald head was polished to a high gloss. What an unpleasant surprise, Monsieur Allon. I didn't realize we had an appointment this morning. It must have slipped your mind, Maurice. I'm quite certain it didn't. With a pair of small, dark eyes, he watched the pedestrians filing past the window. Do your friends in the Police Nationale know you're in Paris? I certainly hope not. As do I. Just then the door of the brasserie opened, and in walked Angélique Brossard, owner of a nearby shop that sold antique French crystal and glass figurines. The table she chose was on the opposite side of the room, as far away from Durand as possible, noted Gabriel. You're not fooling anyone, Maurice. The entire arrondissement knows that the two of you have been involved in the longest 5-7 in French history. A slanderous rumor, I assure you. When are you going to marry her? Angélique is married, just not to me. And when she tires of you? I'm confident she won't. You see, I'm rather good at what I do. Durand smiled. As are you, Monsieur Allon. I'm an art restorer, And you are a dealer of antique scientific and medical instruments.
He pointed toward the shop across the street.
It says so in the window.
But Maurice Durand was also one of the greatest art thieves who ever lived. These days he operated solely as a broker in the process known as commissioned theft, or as Durand liked to describe it, he managed the acquisition of paintings that were not technically for sale.
What brings you to Paris?
He asked. An interesting development in a high-profile case. Durand accepted Gabriel's phone and examined the photograph displayed on the screen, his expression inscrutable. At length he asked,
Do you think it hurt when he did it?
He's lucky he didn't die. The razor severed an artery in his neck. There was blood in every room in the yellow house.
But the result was a masterpiece. And to think it's gone forever?
Durand gave a slow shake of his head.
A tragedy, truly.
But with a happy ending, as it turns out. You see, Maurice, that photograph was taken yesterday.
C'est impossible.
The painting was discovered at a luxury villa on the Amalfi Coast. The owner is a man named
Lucas Van Damme.
Durand lowered his gaze toward the screen of Gabriel's phone.
Where is he now?
An Italian morgue.
What a pity.
I take it by your entirely disingenuous expression of grief that you and Van Damme were acquainted.
We were introduced by a common associate.
When?
Let's call it 5 years ago.
Let's be precise instead. Durand made a show of reflection.
I believe it was the autumn of 2017.
Van Damme wished to utilize your services.
Durand nodded.
What was he after?
A Van Gogh.
Anything in particular?
Bedroom at Arles.
Which version?
The third.
The one at the Musée d'Orsay?
A Bastille, murmured Durand. I told Van Damme the job was out of the question, and suggested several other Van Goghs that were more readily attainable. When he ruled out those paintings, I suggested self-portrait with bandaged ear.
Which you had pinched from the Cortot 6 years earlier.
Approximately.
On behalf of a client from the Arab world, added Gabriel.
The identity or nationality of the original buyer is of no consequence. All that matters is that I offered him a chance to sell the painting at a profit, and he agreed. Monsieur Van Damme was so pleased with the arrangement that a few months later he approached me with another commission.
What was he in the market for this time?
Dutch Golden Age.
But not just any Dutch Golden Age, said Gabriel.
No. Van Damme wanted something specific. A genre piece, musical in nature, painted in the city of Delft in 1664.
Oil on canvas? 72.5 by 64.7 centimeters.
Oui, said Maurice Durand. The Concert, by Johannes Vermeer.
10. Rue de Méroménil. For a few brief years, he enjoyed a certain modest celebrity, at least in his hometown. But by the autumn of 1672, with Holland locked in a protracted and economically ruinous war with France, he was no longer able to find buyers for his paintings. His death in December 1675 left his wife, Catharina Bolnès, and their 11 surviving children destitute. In a petition to her creditors, she declared that her husband's inability to sell his work had plunged him into a frenzy and a state of decay and decadence. His end, she wrote, was swift. In a day and a half, he went from being alive to being dead. She inherited 19 of her husband's paintings, more than half his oeuvre. She immediately sold 2 of the canvases for the sum of 617 guilders to the baker Hendrik van Buyten, to whom she owed a substantial debt. A court-ordered inventory of his studio, it was located on the second floor of his mother-in-law's spacious house on Oude Langendijk in Delft, listed 2 chairs, 2 easels, 3 pallets, 10 canvases, a desk, an oaken table, and a cupboard filled with rummage not worthy of being itemized. The trustee's document made no mention of his costly pigments, especially his beloved lapis lazuli, or the mouse stick he used to steady his hand while painting. Also absent was any reference to a camera obscura or camera lucida, optical tools that some later scholars would insist he utilized. Where he learned his craft, or even whether he was properly trained at all, is not known. Indeed, with few exceptions, the details of his brief life went with him to his grave in Delft's Oude Kerk, where his coffin was laid atop those of 3 of his children who had died in infancy. Even the exact date of his birth in 1632 is unclear, though according to surviving Reformed Church records, he was baptized on October 31st and christened Johannes,
perhaps because his parents found it more fetching than the conventional Jan. His father, an innkeeper and art dealer, was called Reinier Janszoon Vos, Vos being the Dutch word for fox. Sometime around 1640, however, Reinier began to refer to himself by a contraction of the surname Van de Meer, or of the sea. His son also took the name, which was Vermeer. Within a few short years of his death, his reputation had fallen into such decline that Arnold Houbraken, in his indispensable 1718 anthology of the Dutch Golden Age, scarcely saw fit to mention him. But on May 22, 1822, a painting called A View of Delft sold at auction in Amsterdam to a representative of the Mauritius Museum in The Hague, which was where, 20 years later, it caught the eye of Théophile Thoré-Burger. So enchanted was the noted French journalist and art critic that he resolved to track down the artist's surviving works and rescue him from obscurity. An 1866 essay, it was entitled Van der Meer de Delft, listed more than 70 potential paintings, though even Thoré-Burger was convinced the actual number was perhaps 49. Later scholars would whittle it down to just 34. Most were painted in one of two rooms in the house at Oude Langendijk, and featured the same furniture and the same women as his models. He portrayed them as mistresses and maids, as writers and readers of letters, as drinkers of wine and makers of lace, and in 1665 he dressed a young woman in an exotic gown and turban and produced his masterpiece. The work would eventually derive its name from the girl's large pear-shaped earring. Whether it was actually a pearl is now a matter of some dispute, with at least one scholar suggesting it was likely fashioned of tin instead. During that same period, he executed a musical scene that would become known as the concert. Precisely where the painting went when it left his studio is unclear, though it is widely assumed it was once in the collection of Peter van Rijven, his longtime patron. What is known for certain is that on December 5, 1892, the concert, Lot 31, oil on canvas, 72.5 by 64.7 centimeters, changed hands for 29,000 francs at the Hôtel Drouot auction house in Paris. The seller was none other than Théophile Thoré-Burger. The buyer, a wealthy American heiress and art collector named Isabella Stewart Gardner. She took the painting to Boston, and in 1903 placed it in a new museum she built in the city's marshy Fenway area, which is where it remained, in a room on the second floor, until the early morning hours of Sunday, March 18, 1990, when it disappeared without a trace. It was security guard Rick Abbott, a Berklee School of Music dropout and keyboardist in a local rock band, who at 1:24 a.m. unwittingly admitted the two thieves into the museum. Dressed in what appeared to be authentic Boston Police Department uniforms, they claimed to be investigating a disturbance in the neighborhood. Abbott saw no reason to question their story, nor did he find it suspicious when the shorter of the two men asked him to step away from the watch desk. The intruder immediately forced Abbott against a wall and cuffed his hands behind his back. Randy Hestand, who was working the overnight shift for the first time, was handcuffed a moment later, when he returned to the watch desk after making his rounds. "Gentlemen," announced one of the thieves, "this is a robbery." With the guards subdued and the museum's security cameras disabled, Isabella Stewart Gardner's remarkable collection of art and antiquities lay defenseless. For more than an hour the thieves attacked without mercy, beginning with a pair of Rembrandts in the second-floor Dutch room, A Lady and Gentleman in Black, and The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, the artist's only seascape. The marauders slashed both works from their stretchers. They also attempted to steal Rembrandt's iconic self-portrait age 23, but left it leaning against a cabinet, helping themselves instead to a postage stamp-size Rembrandt etching. Two works they managed to remove from their frames without resorting to undue violence. One was Landscape with Obelisk by Govert Flink. The other was the Dutch room's most valuable painting, The Concert by Johannes Vermeer. After snatching an ancient Chinese vase, they headed next to the Short Gallery, which yielded an imperial French finial and 5 sketches by Edgar Degas. The last painting seized was Edouard Manet's Chez Tortoni, from the first-floor Blue Room. The immense size of the haul required the thieves to make 2 trips to their waiting hatchback on Palace Road, the last at 2:45 a.m. when they made their escape. The total time of the robbery was 81 minutes. The estimated value of the 13 stolen artworks was an astonishing $200 million, making it the largest heist in history. By midday, the FBI had assumed control of the investigation. Led by 26-year-old Dan Falzon, it would be hampered by an unusual lack of forensic evidence, such as fingerprints, footprints, hair, or cigarette butts. Agents interviewed witnesses and scoured the museum's employment and maintenance records for possible links to the robbery. Security guards Abbott and Hestend were subjected to repeated interrogations as Falson and his agents probed their accounts for inconsistencies. They found it suspicious that Abbott, while making his rounds earlier that evening, had opened and closed the museum's side door. Agents were troubled, too, by the fact that the motion detectors in the Blue Room, from which Manet's Chez Tortoni was taken, showed no intruders during the 81 minutes of the robbery. With an annual budget of only $2.8 million, the Gardner Museum could not afford to insure its collection. But with the help of the auction giants Sotheby's and Christie's, it was able to offer a $1 million reward for information leading to the recovery of the stolen works. Falson and his team pursued thousands of leads and tips from the public, including one from a man in Charlestown who claimed to have seen the concert hanging on a neighbor's wall. The neighbor invited FBI agents and museum officials into her home and showed them a high-quality print of the painting. A report that the storm on the Sea of Galilee might be in Japan proved no more accurate. It was not Rembrandt's masterpiece that Falson and Japanese police found hanging on the wall of an eccentric collector, but a crude paint-by-numbers version instead. 4 years after the theft, the museum received an anonymous typewritten letter promising to facilitate the return of the stolen works in exchange for $2.6 million. Gardner director Anne Hawley considered it the most promising lead to date, but like all the others, it quickly went nowhere. Desperate, Hawley increased the size of the reward to an astonishing $5 million. In the Dutch and Blue Rooms, patrons gawked at 6 empty frames. A psychic claimed that the museum's founder, in her grave since 1924, had told her the missing paintings were hidden in the ceiling of the restoration lab. Security Chief Lyle Grindle dutifully climbed a ladder to have a look for himself. The paintings, of course, were not there. In May 2017, the Gardner Museum's Board of Trustees doubled the reward to $10 million, the largest bounty for stolen goods ever offered. Still, the thieves refused to part with their loot. But who were they? And for whom were they working? There was no shortage of suspects, most of whom were connected to Boston's thriving Irish and Italian criminal underworld. But there were other theories as well, some laughable, others merely implausible. And it was there that Maurice Durand, perhaps the greatest art thief who ever lived, picked up the thread of the story. 11. Rue de Méroménil.
My favorite was the one about the shadowy Vatican operatives.
Mine too, admitted Gabriel.
Why would the Vatican, which has more paintings than it knows what to do with, want to steal more? And who are these so-called shadowy Vatican operatives?
You'd be surprised. Durand raised an eyebrow.
Are you saying it's possible?
I'm more interested in your opinion, Maurice. He appeared to give the question serious consideration before answering,
In my opinion, the thieves were almost certainly local Boston hoodlums who are connected to larger criminal networks. Generally speaking, these networks are quite good at stealing art, but they haven't a clue how to bring it to market. As a result, the paintings end up being used as underworld cash. Criminal travelers' checks, if you will. They move from gang to gang, usually as collateral, sometimes as tribute and trophies. Because paintings are easily smuggled, they often travel long distances. Across oceans, in fact.
Where did the Vermeer end up?
Monsieur Van Damme had been told by one of his associates that it could be had in Dublin.
From whom?
The Kinahan cartel, Ireland's most powerful criminal organization. He wanted me to travel there on his behalf and negotiate a deal.
What was your response?
Thank you, no. This business is dangerous enough without getting mixed up with Irish gangsters.
How much did it cost to get you to yes?
My memory is a little fuzzy on that.
Put your back into it, Maurice.
It might have been 20% of the final sale price.
Highway robbery, said Gabriel. Durand placed a hand over his heart.
The negotiations included blindfolds and several long journeys in the trunk of a car. I consider myself most fortunate to have survived.
Who was the man on the other side of the table?
Let's refer to him as Monsieur O'Donnell. A connoisseur he was not. He allowed me to see the painting only once. For all I know, I was in Belfast at the time.
And?
I do not pretend to be the last word on Dutch Golden Age painters, but I was confident it was the Vermeer.
Did you get a second opinion?
Monsieur O'Donnell wouldn't allow it.
What was the final sale price?
50 million, said Durand. The handover took place in Barcelona a week later. I was lucky to survive that as well. I delivered the painting to Amalfi the next day, and Monsieur Van Damme paid me my commission.
Mazel tov, Maurice. Gabriel removed a manila file folder from the zippered pouch of his overnight bag. Inside was the photograph that General Ferrari had given to him in Amalfi. He placed it before Durand and said,
I assume you recognize the men.
Oui? What about the woman?
Durand shook his head.
She called herself Ursula Roth.
German?
So she said.
What can you tell me about her methods?
Evidently she sweet-talked her way into Van Damme's villa and broke into the vault after dinner.
The lock was very secure.
She seems to know her way around safes and computers.
Durand slid the photograph into the file folder.
And if I'm able to find her?
I will return the concert by Johannes Vermeer to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, and against all better judgment, I will once again overlook your deplorable conduct.
And if my inquiry proves unsuccessful?
Asked Durand. I'm quite confident it won't.
How long do I have?
How long do you need?
A week at least.
In that case, said Gabriel, you have exactly 72 hours. 12. Skien. The custom-made Pinarello road bike, the envy of Jutland's thriving cycling community, leaned against the exterior of Nordenbarn Café on Havneve. Ingrid Johansson, in a Gore-Tex jacket and full-length leggings, sat at a nearby table, phone in hand. The town around her, with its quaint buildings painted Skien yellow, was bathed in the intense golden sunlight that had drawn a circle of painters to the little fishing village in the late 19th century. Ingrid scarcely noticed it. She was distracted by an article she had stumbled across in the Naples daily Il Mattino, the one about the murder of a wealthy South African expatriate living on the Amalfi coast. Rising, she swung a leg over the sloping top tube of the Pinarello and set off along the empty street. At the southern edge of the village, she rounded a traffic circle and eased onto the bike path bordering Prima Route 40. With the wind at her back, she covered the 13.5 kilometers down to Hulsig in 20 minutes. Then she headed west, across tabletop flat farmland, to Canasterne. In the gorse-covered dunes was a colony of holiday cottages occupied mainly in summer. Ingrid's modern dwelling, with its soaring windows overlooking the North Sea, was a few paces from the beach. The lock on the front door was electronic, with a hard 14-digit passcode that she changed frequently. She typed it into the keypad, then wheeled the bike into the entrance hall and silenced the bleating of the commercial-grade alarm system. The information screen showed no intrusions during the 2 hours she had been away. She removed her cycling shoes and, in stockinged feet, padded into the great room. The floors were pale wood, the furnishings were Scandinavian and modern. Luxurious, yes, but with the exception of a reference-level Hegel audio system, there was nothing to suggest that Ingrid might have access to hidden sources of wealth. The government was under the impression she was a well-paid freelance IT professional, which was indeed the case. Her company, Skien Cyber Solutions, had taken in more than 4 million Danish kroner in 2021. Her legitimate earnings were down slightly this year, though she had more than made up the shortfall with her illicit income, which had soared to record levels. Her annual winter visit to the ski resorts of Switzerland and France had proven especially profitable. There was the wealthy but guileless couple from Connecticut. He worked for a hedge fund, she in corporate public relations, whose suite at the Badruz Palace Hotel in St. Moritz had yielded a double strand of Mikimoto pearls and a diamond bracelet by Harry Winston. And the libidinous Russian tycoon, who awoke after a night of heavy drinking in the clubs of Courchevel to find that both Ingrid and his €1,000,000 Richard Mille wristwatch had vanished without a trace. And the minor Saudi prince, a distant cousin of the future king, who somehow managed to misplace an attaché case stuffed with cash while on holiday in Zermatt with his 3 wives and 12 children. The jewelry alone had fetched $500,000 on the black market in Antwerp. Ingrid spent the summer relaxing at her villa on Mykonos, one of the few places in the world where, for the most part, she kept her hands to herself. It had been her intention to return to Denmark in September, but her plans changed after the phone call she received from Peter Nielsen, an antiquarian book dealer who disposed of rare manuscripts that Ingrid occasionally found lying around unoccupied European villas and chateaux. Peter had received an unusual request from one of his clients, a request that involved a painting that hung in a villa on the Amalfi coast.
The offer was too lucrative to turn down. 5 million euros up front, another 5 million on delivery. Ingrid's office was located on the second floor of the cottage. The painting was locked in a storage cabinet, hidden inside a leather document tube. She removed the canvas and unfurled it onto her desk. Unframed, it appeared somehow ordinary. Still, she felt honored to be in its presence, and guilty as well. Cash and jewels could be replaced, but the concert by Johannes Vermeer was part of the Western canon, a sacred object. The previous evening, while under the influence of Miles Davis, she had given serious consideration to quietly placing the Vermeer in the hands of the proper authorities, perhaps in the Dutch town of Delft. That, she reasoned, would provide a fitting and dramatic finale to the painting's story. But it would also put Ingrid sideways with Peter Nielsen and his client. After all, she had accepted 5 million euros of the client's money, a significant portion of which she had already donated anonymously to charity. And then, of course, there was the article in Il Mattino. Ingrid was quite certain that Lucas Van Dam had been alive and well, and sleeping soundly thanks to the liquid ketamine he had ingested with his barbaresco, when she left his villa at 12:45 a.m. Breaking into the South African's vault room had required all of 30 seconds. Ingrid had been taken aback by the presence of an iconic painting by Vincent van Gogh, but had resisted the urge to steal it. Her instructions had been specific. The Vermeer, and only the Vermeer. Besides, removing the canvas from its stretcher had taken longer than she anticipated. Just then her phone pulsed with an incoming encrypted signal message. It was Peter Nielsen, wondering when he might take delivery of the world's most valuable missing painting, or words to that effect. Ingrid had no choice but to deliver the Vermeer as promised. If nothing else, it would give her the opportunity to clear up one or two small details about the events in Amalfi. Specifically, she wanted to know what sort of mess her friend had got her into. Ordinarily, she delivered stolen goods to Peter's shop, but present circumstances called for discretion. Wiesenberg, located on the island of Funen, was about halfway between Skehen and Copenhagen. There was an auto plaza just off the E20, a Q8 petrol station, a convenience mart, a little cafe. What was the name of it? Jürgens? Yes, that was it. Jürgens Smørrebrød Café. They could meet there. But not right away, thought Ingrid, reaching for her phone. She wanted to spend another day or two with the Vermeer before letting it go. Thursday sounded about right, but come to think of it, Friday would probably be more convenient. Friday at 6 p.m. at Jürgens Smørrebrød Café. Peter was to come alone and with 5 million euros in cash. No money, no painting, typed Ingrid. Or words to that effect. 13. Ile Saint-Louis. Gabriel left Martin Landesmann's apartment on the Ile Saint-Louis at 1 the following afternoon, and lunched in the shadow of Notre Dame. Afterward he walked along the Seine embankments to the Musée d'Orsay, and was relieved to find La Chambre de Van Gogh à Arles still hanging in the Galerie des Impressionnistes. His next stop was the Richelieu wing of the Louvre, where he paid a visit to Vermeer's The Astronomer. Like the concert, the painting had once been stolen, not by ordinary criminals, but by the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, the official art looters of Nazi Germany. It had survived its wartime ordeal largely intact, though with the addition of a small swastika stamped in black ink on the back of the canvas. Gabriel's final destination was Brasserie Dumas on the Rue de Miromesnil. There at 5:15 he observed Maurice Durand switching the sign in his shop window from Ouvert to Fermé. Angélique Brossard departed 30 minutes later, followed soon after by Durand himself. The Frenchman joined Gabriel for an aperitif. "She's a good old-fashioned cat burglar, your girl. Likes to get close to her targets, then robs them blind. She prefers cash and jewelry, though on occasion other valuable objets have been known to attach themselves to her sticky fingers." "Is she German?" "That depends on whom you ask. Apparently she's something of a chameleon. Some say she's German or Swiss, others say Dutch or Scandinavian. Everyone agrees she's quite skilled when it comes to disabling security systems." "How is she with a 9mm pistol?" "She might carry one, but she would be loath to use it. That's not her modus operandi." "Is this the first time she's strayed onto your turf?" "Evidently." "The impertinence." "My feelings, exactly." "Jewelry is easier to unload than paintings," observed Gabriel. "Much," agreed Durand. "Luxury wristwatches have to be resold intact, of course, but gold can be melted down, and diamonds can be incorporated into other pieces.
all of which would require a fence.
As usual, said Durand, I am one step ahead of you.
Next morning, Paris awoke to a barrage of thunder and lightning, the opening salvo of a freak autumn storm that dumped a month's worth of rain on the city in less than an hour. Gabriel monitored the rising waters of the Seine from the comfort of Martin's sitting room, with one eye on Télématin, France 2's breakfast television program. Elsewhere, the news was little better. On the opposite side of the English Channel, a British Prime Minister was fighting for her political life after signing off on a disastrous tax cut plan that had disrupted British debt markets and driven the pound to record lows. Not to be outdone, Russia had launched yet another murderous air assault against civilian targets in war-torn Ukraine, this time using drones supplied by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Almost unnoticed was a warning by a leading American security expert that the war had brought Russia and the West closer to a nuclear confrontation than during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The world, thought Gabriel, was careening dangerously out of control. One more shock to the system, another financial meltdown, a disruption of the food supply, a resurgence of the pandemic, might well spell the end of the project known as the post-war liberal order. By late afternoon, the deluge had eased, and life in Paris had returned largely to normal, at least on the Rue de Miromesnil.
What's next?
Asked Maurice Durand, as he stared gloomily out the rain-spattered window of Brasserie Dumas.
A plague of locusts?
Frogs, murmured Gabriel.
I wouldn't mind frogs, so long as they are edible, of course.
Plague frogs aren't edible, Maurice. That's why they're plague frogs. Durand frowned.
Something bothering you, Monsieur Allon?
Besides the imminent collapse of Western civilization?
Oui.
I'm a bit miffed that my confidential informant found time for his daily rendezvous with his mistress, but hasn't been able to determine where my girl is fencing her stolen jewels.
Antwerp,
said Durand.
Where else?
It made sense, thought Gabriel. 80% of the world's diamonds pass through Antwerp, and Belgium, with its weak central government and largely incompetent national police force, had a well-deserved reputation as Europe's destination of choice for criminals looking to buy or sell goods on the black market.
Do you know the fence's name? Asked Gabriel. Or should I just go door to door in the diamond quarter? I believe there are at least 24 hours remaining on my deadline clock.
Gabriel spent most of those hours locked away in Martin's apartment, reading a French-language edition of Charlotte Gray by Sebastian Faulks. He finished the novel while sipping a glass of excellent Côte Durand at Brasserie Dumas. Maurice Durand joined him at 6:30, wearing a glassy-eyed expression of incredulity, and it seemed to Gabriel utter defeat.
Why so blue?
He asked.
Angélique,
muttered the Frenchman.
She's unwell? In love.
Durand paused, then added,
with someone else.
After all these years?
I asked her the same thing.
How did she possibly find the time?
Trust me, I asked her that as well.
Durand handed Gabriel a slip of paper. On it was written a name and an address.
He's connected to the European branch of the Armenian Mafia. They have anger management issues, the Armenians. Therefore, I would be grateful if you didn't mention my name when you speak to him. I have enough problems.
Outside, Gabriel bade farewell to his lovelorn confidential informant and returned to the apartment on the Ile Saint-Louis. He rang the owner and requested another favor.
How much are we talking about?
Asked the Swiss financier. Enough to turn the head of a dirty diamond dealer in Antwerp.
He's not one of yours, is he?
Armenian, actually.
I'm sure he'd find Monique's jewelry to his liking.
Monique was Martin's glamorous French-born wife.
She only keeps a small collection in Paris, but everything is quite valuable.
Diamonds?
My darling Monique doesn't set foot outside the house unless she's dripping with them.
Where might I find them?
The safe in our dressing room.
Combination?
I'm surprised you need it.
Martin recited 3 numbers.
Just to be clear, you do intend to return everything, don't you?
Barring some unforeseen development.
These things add up, you know. $1 million here and $1 million there, and pretty soon you're talking about real money.
I need some of that, too.
There's a couple $100,000 in the safe, said Martin with a sigh. Help yourself.
14. Föhnen. The Coalition for a Green Denmark was founded in 2005 by Anders Holm and 9 other students from Aalborg University's Department of Politics and Society. The group's primary objective, spelled out in its grandiose charter, was a carbon-free Danish economy by the year 2025. It created a website that no one visited,
organized symposia and marches that no one attended, and obtained signatures on lofty petitions that few people in positions of power or influence bothered to accept, let alone read. Which led Anders Holm, 2 years after the coalition's formation, to undertake a shift in tactics. The days of pamphlets and petitions, he declared, were over. The group would now embark on a campaign of provocative direct action, a campaign that included a series of embarrassing hacks and denial-of-service attacks on the computer networks of Denmark's largest emitters of greenhouse gases. The Danish police were never able to apprehend the hacker responsible, in part because only Anders knew her identity, Ingrid Johansen, a brilliant student from the university's Department of Computer Sciences. Ingrid was proud of the hacks she had carried out for the coalition, but it was the drug-like rush of breaking into supposedly secure computer networks that she found most exhilarating. She carried out a few more jobs for Anders, against polluters and powerful businessmen, and even a government minister, but soon her skill at the keyboard alone was not enough to satisfy her addiction. It was too easy, too safe. Feeding her habit required the assumption of greater risk. Like most thieves, she honed her skills by shoplifting. Before long, she was picking locks and pockets, especially in the bars of Aalborg, where her victims were often addled by alcohol. She learned to be outgoing and flirtatious, which did not come naturally to her, and to welcome the advances of men. Older men in particular, as they generally carried more cash and other valuables and were easily flattered by attractive young women. Ingrid's looks, she discovered, were an asset. The face of crime in contemporary Scandinavia bore little resemblance to hers. She left the university at the end of her second year, on the pretense of starting her own IT consultancy, and embarked on a one-woman crime wave that stretched the length and breadth of Denmark. She stole her first diamonds in Copenhagen and sold them for a fraction of what they were worth to a Serbian gang in Frankfurt, a transaction she had been lucky to survive. It was then that she bought her gun, a Glock 26 subcompact, from a member of the Black Cobra street gang in Malmö. The Cobra, whose name was Ibrahim Kaduri, taught Ingrid how to use the weapon and how to sell stolen jewelry without getting killed in the process. Ibrahim knew an Armenian in the Diamond Quarter of Antwerp, a reputable fence, if there was such a thing. Ingrid returned the favor by giving Ibrahim 10,000 kroner in cash and 200 stolen credit cards for which she had no use. By the time she turned 30, she was taking in upwards of €500,000 a year as a thief, in addition to the legitimate income she earned from her consulting business. She purchased the cottage in Kenestone, and after a particularly productive summer in Saint-Tropez, her villa on Mykonos. She stole only from the wealthy. They were the ones with the money and the valuables after all, and kept only what she needed to finance her admittedly comfortable lifestyle. The rest she donated to charity using anonymous wire transfers or DHL parcels stuffed with cash. Through it all, Ingrid remained a committed environmentalist and climate activist. Her homes were carbon neutral, and her car was a plug-in hybrid Volvo XC90. At 4:30 on Friday afternoon, it was moving southward down the Jutland Peninsula on the E45. Ingrid wore a fashionable Randers beanie and lightly tinted sunglasses, rendering her all but unrecognizable. Her Glock was in her handbag, which was resting on the passenger seat. The leather document tube containing The Concert by Johannes Vermeer was in the Volvo's forward trunk. The skies over Jutland had finally cleared after 48 hours of torrential rain and wind. Ingrid crossed the little belt bridge at 5 p.m. and headed eastward across Funen on the E20. The sun was still shining brightly when she reached the auto plaza in Wissenberg. She attached the Volvo to a charging station at the Q8 and, taking only her handbag, entered Jürgen's Smørrebrød Café. 2 tables were occupied, one by an unhappy-looking Danish couple of late middle age, the other by a man of perhaps 40 who was wearing a dark business suit beneath a car-length overcoat. Not Danish, thought Ingrid. A Finn, perhaps, maybe an Estonian or Latvian. Good shoes, nice wristwatch, probably a few hundred in his wallet. Not an easy mark, though. He looked confident, sure of himself. He also seemed to have no interest at all in Ingrid, which was rare. Most men couldn't help but cast at least a glance of appraisal in her direction. She ordered coffee and a chicken salad smørrebrød from the girl behind the counter and carried it to a table against the window. The unhappy Danish couple departed the cafe first, at 5:45 p.m., followed 10 minutes later by the man who might or might not have been from Finland or one of the Baltic states. Outside, a man in his mid-60s was filling an E-Class Mercedes sedan with petrol. With his tweed jacket and beige roll-neck sweater, There was no mistaking him for anything other than an antiquarian book dealer from Copenhagen. And a crooked one, at that. He returned the nozzle to the pump and eased his Mercedes into a space in the car park. When he entered the cafe, he was carrying a cheap-looking attaché case. He purchased a coffee, and with both hands occupied, approached Ingrid's table. Rising, she embraced him warmly and plucked the phone from the patch pocket of his tweed coat. He sat down and placed the attaché case in the chair next to him. "When are you going to get rid of that car?" asked Ingrid, as she slid Peter's phone into her handbag.
"It's only 3 years old."
"Which means you'll get a very good trade-in price when you switch to a hybrid or electric model."
"I like the feel of a gas engine."
"And how will you feel when the rising seas inundate your beautiful bookshop on Stroe?"
"I'm on the 2nd floor,"
replied Peter, and held out his hand. Frowning, Ingrid surrendered the phone.
"You've lost your touch, girl."
"The painting in my car would suggest otherwise."
"It belongs to my client."
"Not yet," said Ingrid.
"You're not thinking about doing something stupid, are you?"
"Like what?"
"Attempting to sweeten your end of the deal?"
"It never entered my mind. But now that you mention it—"
"Forget it, Ingrid. My client is angry enough as it is."
"About what?"
"The needless bloodshed."
"That makes 2 of us."
"Was there really no other way to get the painting?"
Ingrid raised her coffee to her lips.
"I didn't kill Van Damme," she said quietly. "Someone entered the villa after I left. I was wondering whether you or your client might know who it was."
"I can assure you my client had nothing to do with it."
"Who is he?"
"You know the rules, Ingrid. You don't know the identity of the client, and the client doesn't know you."
He peered out the window toward Ingrid's Volvo.
"The damn thing is locked, I hope?"
"To tell you the truth, I'm not sure."
"What kind of shape is it in?"
"Remarkably good."
"Maybe I should have a look at it."
Ingrid glanced at the attaché case.
"First things first."
She unplugged the charging cable from the Volvo and slid behind the wheel. Peter lowered himself into the passenger seat. With the attaché case balanced on his thighs, he worked the combination locks, then popped the latches. Ingrid removed 2 bundles of newly printed €500 banknotes and examined them by the overhead light.
5 million, right, Peter?
"Have I ever shortchanged you?"
He hadn't, but they'd never done a deal of this scale. Besides, this was likely to be the last money Ingrid would earn for some time. She returned the bundles of cash to the attaché case, and Peter closed the lid.
"Are we good?"
he asked. Ingrid started the engine and pressed the release for the forward trunk.
"You might want to keep some of that for yourself,"
advised Peter, and climbed out. A moment later, he was carrying the leather document tube across the car park toward his Mercedes, unaware of the fact he was no longer in possession of his mobile phone. Ingrid switched off the device and slipped it into the Faraday pouch she carried habitually in her handbag.
"So much for losing my touch," she thought,
and set out for Kenasturn. Peter Nielsen was halfway across the Storebæltsbroen, the 18-kilometer bridge linking the islands of Funen and Zealand, before he realized that Ingrid had once again taken his phone. He supposed he had it coming. The remark about her skills decaying had been out of line. His friend was as sharp as ever. The painting resting on the floor of the back seat was proof of that. It was too late to go chasing after her now. He would drive to Skagen in the morning after delivering the painting to the client. He only hoped that Ingrid didn't manage to unlock his phone in the interim. It contained encrypted correspondence he did not wish her to see, correspondence regarding the client's identity and the amount of money he had paid Peter to acquire the Vermeer. Yes, Ingrid had been well compensated, but the split had hardly been equitable. In a few hours' time, Peter would be a very rich man indeed. As usual, the wind was howling through the Great Belt. Peter drove with both hands fixed to the steering wheel. Even so, he labored to keep the Mercedes within its lane as he traversed the towering suspension portion of the bridge. He never enjoyed crossing the Storebæltsbroen, especially at night, when the sensation of being airborne above the black water always made him slightly sick to his stomach. And what about that guardrail? Less than a meter high it was. Would it really save him if a sudden blast of wind were to send his car out of control? Unlikely, he thought. He would plunge to his death and sink slowly into the abyss, undoubtedly in the deepest portion of the strait. And there he would lie for all eternity, with The Concert by Johannes Vermeer at his side. His mood improved as he began the long descent toward Zealand's western shoreline. He sped through the express lane of the toll plaza, and an hour later reached the fringes of Copenhagen. His bachelor's apartment was on Nansensgade, in the trendy district of Nørrebro, about a 10-minute walk from his shop. He slid the Mercedes into an empty space outside his building and switched off the engine. Then he reached a right hand toward the floorboard at the back seat and grasped the leather document tube containing the world's most valuable missing painting. He maneuvered the document tube carefully over the headrest of the passenger seat and opened the door and climbed out. Only then did he notice the man walking toward him along the pavement with his hands thrust into the pockets of a car-length overcoat. Peter was certain he had seen the man somewhere before, and recently. But where? The gun brought a sudden end to his deliberations. The large semi-automatic pistol that the man drew with shocking elegance from the interior of his overcoat. When pointed toward Peter's face, the weapon emitted 2 bright flashes, but scarcely a sound. And down he went, into the black water, into the abyss. The concert by Johannes Vermeer did not make the journey with him. The man with the gun had taken it. The man whom Peter had seen at 5:55 p.m. that very evening, leaving the café in Wiesenbier. He needed to warn Ingrid that her life was in danger. But he couldn't. Ingrid had taken his damn phone. 15. The Amant Quartier. Only a man of Martin Landesman's immense wealth would have used the word small to describe the astonishing collection of jewelry that Gabriel discovered when he opened the safe in Monique's dressing room. There were more than 100 pieces in all, including a diamond solitaire pendant in a platinum setting, about 12 carats in weight. Gabriel stole wisely but judiciously, taking only what he needed, including 100,000 euros in walking-around money, and made his escape in his victim's car, with his victim's usual Paris driver behind the wheel. It was midnight when he entered the appropriately named Sapphire House in central Antwerp. A diamond suite had been reserved in his name. His victim's investment firm was picking up the tab, including incidentals. The hotel was on the Lange Nieuwstraat, not far from Antwerp's stately old town. With its narrow streets and plentiful shops and cafes, it was a perfect place for a leisurely surveillance detection run, which Gabriel conducted after a light breakfast the following morning. It did not take him more than a few minutes to establish that Belgium's crack internal security service did not realize that the former Director General of the office was staying at one of the city's better hotels. He headed next to Meyer, Antwerp's main shopping street, for a wardrobe change. Form-fitting black jeans, a black pullover, zippered ankle boots, a leather overcoat, an oversized gold wristwatch, a gold necklace, a pair of yellow-tinted glasses. He donned the clothing in his suite at the Sapphire House and emerged at 12:30, looking thoroughly disreputable and not a little dangerous. He was, after all, a criminal, a master thief who had recently pinched more than €1 million worth of jewelry from an apartment on the Ile Saint-Louis in Paris. Several of the pieces were concealed in the pockets of his overcoat, including a 12-carat diamond solitaire pendant. The rest of his loot was stashed in his room safe, along with his Israeli passport and Israeli-made mobile phone, reputedly the world's most secure. His 9mm Beretta pistol was wedged into the waistband of his trousers at the small of his back. Unlike many of his ilk, he knew how to use it. Downstairs, the concierge regarded him with distaste as he crossed the lobby and went once more into Lange Nieuwstraat. This time he turned to the right and set out toward Antwerpen Centraal Railway Station, widely regarded as one of the world's most beautiful. Its imposing western facade overlooked the Diamant Quartier, a compact district of retail shops, jewelry manufacturers, and brokerage houses through which 234 million carats worth of diamonds flowed annually. Gabriel arrived to find much of the neighborhood shuttered and deserted. It was a Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath, and much of Antwerp's diamond trade remained in Jewish hands. But many recent arrivals in the Diamond Quarter chose to keep their shops open on Saturdays, while their Jewish competitors were observing their religiously mandated day of rest and prayer. One such entrepreneur was a certain Koren Nazarian, the Armenian-born owner of the Mount Ararat Global Diamond Exchange, located at 23 Appelmannstraat. On the opposite side of the street was a trattoria called Café Verde. Gabriel greeted the hostess in Italian, and despite his suspect appearance, was shown to a coveted table in the window. There he quickly reached the conclusion, based in large measure on instinct and hard-won experience, that his old friend Maurice Durand had once again pointed him in the right direction. Perhaps it was the discretion of the firm's entrance, with its opaque glass door and easily overlooked brass placard, or the furtive demeanor of the two men, one of whom appeared to be carrying a concealed weapon, who requested admission to the premises at 1:15. Or the steroid abuser, he of the shaved head and tree-trunk neck, who showed the two callers into the autumn afternoon some 20 minutes later with a smile that suggested their meeting had gone well? Had it involved only precious gemstones, or was the Mount Ararat Global Diamond Exchange a front for other criminal activity? Narcotics, say, or illicit firearms? All Gabriel wanted was a name. The name of the woman who had stolen the Vermeer from Lucas van Dam's villa in Amalfi. It was his ambition to acquire this piece of information with a simple business transaction, one that safeguarded his identity, thus the small fortune in jewelry hidden in the pockets of his atrocious coat. And if that didn't work, he supposed he could always resort to violence. He hoped it didn't come to that. Belgium was one of the few countries in Europe where he had no friends in government or law enforcement. Besides, his back was giving him fits. But what would he call himself? He decided while placing several crisp banknotes atop the bill for his lunch to borrow his son's name, which rivaled his own for hipness. He would be Raffaele. No surname, just Raffaele, like the painter. He was a thief from a hardscrabble village in Calabria, who was connected to the violent criminal syndicate known as the 'Ndrangheta. His bosses were looking for a woman who had recently pulled a big heist on the Amalfi coast. Tribute was owed, honor was due. It was the language every organized criminal understood, especially when a member of the 'Ndrangheta showed up at his door unannounced. Which was precisely what Gabriel did at the stroke of 2 o'clock. He pressed the call button on the intercom panel, and receiving no response, pressed it again. At length a metallic male voice asked, "Ja?" Gabriel answered in English, in a pronounced Italian accent. "I'd like to speak to Corinne Nazarian."
"Mr. Nazarian is unavailable."
"I'll wait."
"Who are you, please?"
"My name is Raffaele."
"Raffaele who?"
Gabriel raised a large carat diamond solitaire toward the security camera. The deadbolts opened with a thud. 16. Appelmanstraat. The steroid abuser was waiting in the cramped foyer, arms folded across his inflated pectorals, feet shoulder-width apart. The carpet beneath him was beige and threadbare. The lights above his head were harsh and fluorescent. Behind him was another locked door and another camera. Wordlessly, he thrust a hand in Gabriel's direction, with the palm facing up. Gabriel grasped the appendage and gave it a genial squeeze. It was like shaking hands with a block of concrete.
"The diamond,"
said the Armenian. Gabriel dangled it like the pendulum of a clock.
"Where did you get it?"
"It belonged to my late mother, may she rest in peace."
"She had good taste."
"And a rich husband." Gabriel returned the pendant to his coat pocket. "I'm interested in selling it. A few other pieces as well."
"Are you carrying a gun?"
"What do you think?"
"Let's have it."
Gabriel surrendered the Beretta butt first to avoid any possible misinterpretation of his motives. Ordinarily, he would have cleared the weapon as well, but members of the 'Ndrangheta were not known for their adherence to basic gun safety etiquette. "May I speak to Mr. Nazarian now?" he asked in his pitch-perfect Italian accented English. The Armenian lifted his eyes toward the security camera, and the deadbolts of the next door gave way. Beyond it was an empty waiting room decorated with outsized photographs of glittering diamonds and the rugged mountains of Armenia, from which they had purportedly come. More than 50 diamond-cutting companies operated in the former Soviet Republic, and diamonds accounted for a quarter of the country's exports. Corin Nazarian handled a small portion of those stones. He had no mines or factories of his own, and no retail operation. He was merely a broker, a middleman. He purchased diamonds from one party and sold them to another, hopefully at a profit sufficient enough to keep a roof over his head. It was not an easy way to make a living, thus his willingness to occasionally handle stones of uncertain provenance. He received Gabriel in his office wearing a crisp gray suit and open-necked white shirt with diamond cufflinks. He was a slender, sharp-featured man in his mid-50s, with an aquiline nose and thinning hair combed close to his scalp. He regarded Gabriel speculatively over an unlit cigarette.
"I didn't catch your name earlier."
Gabriel repeated it. One name only, like the painter.
"And what sort of work do you do, Signore Raffaele?"
"I am involved in a number of charitable endeavors, widows and orphans mainly. I'm also quite active in the church."
"How noble."
Nazarian coaxed an elegant gold lighter into flame and touched it to the end of his cigarette.
And in your spare time? I work for an international conglomerate based in Calabria. We did about 60 billion last year, mainly in pharmaceuticals and real estate development.
Nazarian cast an anxious glance toward his associate, and an exchange of quiet Armenian ensued. Gabriel, who neither spoke nor understood a word of the language, used the opportunity to take inventory of the items arrayed atop Nazarian's desk. A crystal paperweight in the shape of an oval-cut diamond, a vintage brass message spike, a Harold Schneider professional jeweler's loop, a cushioned countertop display pad, a weighty ceramic ashtray overflowing with cigarette butts, a calculator, an open notebook computer. The room's only window overlooked a deserted courtyard. The glass was gray-green, one-way, and shatterproof. And bulletproof, thought Gabriel suddenly, though he certainly hoped it didn't come to that. After all, he was not in possession of his firearm. Fully loaded, with a round lodged in the chamber, it was in the giant Armenian's coat pocket. The left pocket, to be precise. Nazarian placed his cigarette in the ashtray.
May I see the diamond, please?
Gabriel took note of the Armenian's use of the word please. They were off to a good start. He placed the solitaire pendant on the display pad. Nazarian examined the stone with the loupe, while the steroid abuser examined Gabriel. He didn't look quite so sure of himself any longer.
My compliments, said Nazarian after a moment. This stone is quite extraordinary.
Yes, I know. Gabriel tossed the rest of the pieces onto the display pad with deliberate carelessness. 4 diamond necklaces, 6 diamond bracelets, 4 pairs of diamond earrings, and 2 diamond rings, the larger of which was 6 carats.
Those aren't bad either.
Nazarian examined them slowly, stone by stone.
Where did you get these, Signore Raffaele? And please, let's skip the part about your sainted mother. I've heard that one many times before.
I acquired them in Paris.
How recently?
Yesterday evening.
Quartier, Piaget?
An apartment in the 4th arrondissement.
Does the owner know they're missing?
Not yet. Nazarian reached for the calculator and spent a moment nimbly fingering the keys.
How much? Asked Gabriel. Diamonds of this quality would be worth nearly 4 million euros on the legitimate market.
And at the Mount Ararat Global Diamond Exchange? Nazarian worked the calculator again and frowned.
I might be able to do 200,000.
My associates in Calabria will be disappointed.
I'm sorry, Signore Raffaele, but I'm afraid it's the best I can do under the circumstances.
Perhaps we can come to some other arrangement, suggested Gabriel.
What sort of arrangement?
I will pay you 10,000 euros in cash, and you will tell me where to find the woman I'm looking for. Mid-30s, quite pretty, maybe German or Swiss, maybe Dutch or Scandinavian. She likes to get close to her targets and then robs them blind. She's especially fond of fine jewelry, which you fence on her behalf. She had a big score on the Amalfi Coast recently. My associates would like their cut.
And if I knew this woman? Asked Nazarian after a moment. Why would I betray her for a mere 10,000 euros?
Because my offer expires in exactly 10 seconds.
And then what? Things are liable to get ugly.
Nazarian placed the loupe to his eye.
You're right, Signore Raffaele. They are indeed.
Gabriel turned to face the steroid abuser. After you. The Israeli martial arts discipline known as Krav Maga is not known for its gracefulness. But then it was not designed with aesthetics in mind. Its sole purpose is to incapacitate or kill an adversary as quickly as possible. Nor does it value fairness. In fact, instructors encourage their students to use heavy objects in their assault, especially when confronted with an adversary of superior size and strength. David did not grapple with Goliath, they are fond of saying. David hit Goliath with a rock, and only then did he cut off his head. The only rocks in Koren Nazarian's office were the diamonds, but even the 12-carat solitaire would have bounced off the Armenian bodybuilder like a pebble hurled at a speeding truck. Gabriel wisely reached for the glass paperweight instead. It struck the Armenian in the left eye, and judging by the crunching sound of the impact, fractured 1 or more of the 7 bones of the orbit. Gabriel was tempted to make use of the brass message spike, but delivered a devastating kick to the shin instead, followed by a knee to the exposed testicles and a phoenix fist to the larynx. The elbow to the temple was probably gratuitous, but it facilitated the recovery of the confiscated Beretta. Aiming the weapon at Corin Nazarian proved unnecessary. Having just watched Gabriel pulverize a man twice his size and half his age, all in a matter of seconds, the diamond broker was suddenly quite loquacious. Yes, he admitted. He knew the woman in question and where she might be found. And no, under no circumstances would he attempt to warn her that a member of the Ndrangheta was looking for her. He asked only that her life be spared, an assurance Signore Raffaele refused to provide. He was, after all, a thoroughly dangerous man. With the jewelry once more in his coat pocket, he saw himself out and returned to the Sapphire House. This time the man who emerged from his suite was a respectable-looking figure of late middle age, clad in hand-tailored Italian trousers, a cashmere jacket, stylish suede loafers, and a woolen overcoat. At 4:30 he was aboard a train bound for Hamburg, the first leg of a journey that would eventually take him to a picturesque fishing village in the far north of Denmark, renowned for the quality of its light. A part of him was actually looking forward to it. If nothing else, it would give him a chance to spend a few days by the North Sea. There were, he thought, far worse ways to find the world's most valuable stolen painting. 17. Kenaston. It happened at 9:17 p.m. Of that, the Danish police were certain. Also beyond dispute was the number of shots fired, which was 2. Both had struck the victim, 64-year-old Peter Nielsen, owner of an antiquarian bookshop on Copenhagen's Strø, in the head. A passerby recalled seeing muzzle flashes but heard no gunshots, suggesting to police that the killer had utilized a suppressor. He had made his escape on a BMW motorcycle, which had been parked outside the victim's apartment building. Traffic surveillance cameras indicated he entered neighboring Sweden shortly after 10 o'clock. As yet, Swedish authorities had been unable to ascertain his whereabouts. Police were perplexed by numerous aspects of the killing, beginning with the fact that it happened at all. Denmark was statistically one of the world's safest countries, with far fewer murders each year than the United States typically saw in a single day. The motive for the killing appeared to be robbery, though investigators were at a loss to explain why the perpetrator's weapon, a 9mm pistol of indeterminate manufacture, had been fitted with a suppressor. Ordinary street thugs rarely bothered with such niceties, at least not in Copenhagen. It was the mark, police concluded, of a professional. But a professional what, exactly? And why had he targeted a rare book dealer, of all people? Yes, there was a fair amount of mischief in the trade, but Peter Nielsen had many prominent clients and had never been the subject of a complaint to the police. Was he embroiled in a business dispute? Always a possibility. Had he happened upon a book of great value, something for which a powerful man might have been willing to kill? An intriguing notion, though it seemed unlikely. After all, the gunman had made off with a storage device better suited to rollable objects such as architectural drawings, or, perhaps, a work of art. The police were likewise confounded by their failure to locate Peter Nielsen's mobile phone, one of several key facts they withheld from their initial statement, which they released at 7:15 a.m. on Saturday. Because it was a weekend, the Copenhagen press was slow off the mark. The tabloid BT had it first, beneath a sensational headline, of course, but it was nearly noon before the story finally appeared on the website of the more reputable Politiken. Ingrid noticed it at 1:30 after returning to her cottage from a 3-hour training ride. The headline declared that a rare book dealer had been murdered in Nørrebro. Surely, she told herself, it was a different dealer. But the story's second paragraph identified the street where the murder had taken place, and in the next paragraph appeared the name and age of the victim. The remaining details were sparse. There was no mention, for example, of a leather document tube containing a long-missing painting by Johannes Vermeer. The suspect, though, was described in some detail. A man in his late 30s or early 40s, wearing a business suit and a mid-length overcoat. As it happened, Ingrid had seen a man matching that description approximately 3.5 hours before Peter was murdered. He had been sitting in Jørgen's Smørrebrød Café in Vissenbjerg. For the moment, at least, Ingrid was more alarmed by the prospect of arrest as an accessory to Peter's murder. She was, after all, in possession of the victim's mobile phone. Stored in its memory was GPS location data that could be used to pinpoint the device's whereabouts at 6 p.m. the previous evening. But even without the phone, police would have little trouble reconstructing Peter's movements during the final hours of his life. He had used his credit card to purchase fuel and a coffee. Surveillance video would show him meeting with a woman in her mid-30s, a woman who had given him a leather document tube in exchange for a briefcase filled with 5 million euros in cash.
Unless, of course, there was no surveillance video. Upstairs in her room, Ingrid stripped off her cycling gear and hastily pulled on jeans and a fleece and a pair of suede boots. The Faraday pouch containing Peter's phone was in her office. She shoved it into a nylon backpack along with a laptop. She would ditch the phone somewhere on the way to Wissenberg, somewhere deep and wet where it would never be found. Fortunately, there was no shortage of such places in the island nation of Denmark. Outside, she slid behind the wheel of her Volvo. A few kilometers south of Aarhus, she turned off the E45 and headed for Mossa, the largest freshwater lake in Jutland. On the eastern shore was a deserted car park. She carried Peter's phone to the water's edge and tried to calculate how far she could hurl the thing. This 174-gram rectangle of silicon, aluminum, potassium, lithium, carbon, and reinforced glass that might well contain the information necessary to identify Peter's killer. Penetrating its defenses was beyond Ingrid's capabilities. Better to be rid of it, to never think of it again. But not here, she thought. No, this wouldn't do. She walked back to her car and returned the phone to the Faraday pouch. Her navigation system forecast an arrival time of 5:45 p.m. She only hoped she wasn't too late. She nearly tossed the phone out her window as she was crossing the Veilfjord Bridge, and again 20 minutes later, as she was spanning the little belt. Both times she returned the device to the Faraday pouch. It was tucked into her backpack when she entered Jürgen's Smørrebrød Café. A different woman stood behind the counter. She was approximately the same age as Ingrid, mid-30s, with magenta hair and too much makeup around her coal-black eyes. The name tag affixed to her Roxy Music shirt read Katja. Something about her face was familiar. Ingrid was convinced she had seen it somewhere before. She ordered a shrimp and egg smørrebrød and a coffee, and sat down at the same table near the window. This time the seating area was deserted. She removed the laptop from her backpack and scanned the list of available wireless networks. She ignored the cafe's free Wi-Fi service and selected a private network called Q8VSBJ instead. A password was required for admission. Ingrid cracked it with a brute force attack, and she was in. The rush hit her instantly. She remembered to eat some of the smørrebrød, and realizing she was famished, devoured half of it. Then she located the security system and got to work. There were 10 surveillance cameras, 2 over the petrol pumps, 2 inside the convenience mart, 4 in the car park, 1 over the door of the cafe, and another behind the counter. All 10 of the cameras were connected wirelessly to a display monitor and recorder in the convenience mart. The weak link in the system was its remote access. Ingrid checked the output of one of the cameras and saw a woman, mid-30s, jeans, a fleece pullover, sitting alone in the Smørrebrød Café before an open laptop computer. It was no matter, she thought. The woman would soon be forgotten. The recorder was capable of storing continuous video for 25 days, a typical interval for security systems designed for homes and small businesses. Ingrid reset the time code for the camera to 6:05 p.m. the previous evening, and saw the same woman sitting at the same table with an antiquarian book dealer from Copenhagen. On the chair next to him was an attaché case. She reset the time code again, this time for 5:40 p.m., and Peter vanished. 2 other tables were now occupied, one by an unhappy-looking Danish couple of late middle age, the other by a man of perhaps 40 who was wearing a dark business suit beneath a car-length overcoat. Ingrid advanced the time code to 5:55 and watched the man's departure from the cafe. The camera behind the counter captured his left profile. The camera over the door, the back of his head. Both cameras, however, had a perfect view of his arrival, which had taken place at 5:18 p.m. Ingrid downloaded the video onto her hard drive, along with footage from a camera in the car park that showed the man climbing into a dark-colored Toyota hatchback. Then, with a single click, she erased 25 days' worth of video from the recorder. Outside, 2 men in uniform were climbing from a Volkswagen Passat bearing the markings of the police of Denmark. Ingrid calmly finished the last of her shrimp and egg smørrebrød. Then she slipped the laptop into her backpack and walked out. It was nearly 10 p.m. when she arrived home. In the kitchen, she brewed a pot of coffee and carried it upstairs to her office. "Well, well," she whispered as she opened her laptop. "Who do we have here?" The image on her screen was of an overcoated man stretching a hand, his left, toward the door of a cafe. The camera angle was downward, the lighting shadowed and subdued. Even so, certain critical aspects of the subject's features were visible. The slope of the forehead and the distance between the eyes, the shape of the cheekbones and nose, the contours of the lips and chin. Ingrid enlarged the image and filtered out some of the graininess. She did the same to the shot captured by the camera behind the counter. Here the lighting was better, and the subject's fate was animated by speech. Ingrid decided to use the second shot for a facial recognition search. She expected it to produce numerous additional photographs of the man, from social media, for example, that she might use to discover his name. At which point the floodgates would open, and his life would be laid bare. His home address, his email address, his mobile phone number, his nationality, his marital status, the name of the football club he supported, his politics, his sexual preferences, his darkest desires. Unless the subject of the investigation was not a normal person, which was the conclusion Ingrid reached after 8 different search engines failed to exhume even a single photograph. Indeed, had she not laid eyes on the man herself, she would have questioned whether he existed at all. By the time Ingrid closed her laptop, it was approaching 4 a.m. She shed her clothes and crawled into bed and lay there, wired and wide-eyed until 7, when she switched on Godmorgen Danmark. The broadcast opened with the murder of a rare book dealer in the fashionable Nørrebro district of Copenhagen. The story led the 8 o'clock hour as well, but at 9 it was displaced by the latest Russian crime against humanity in Ukraine. Ingrid, however, was distracted by an unsettling development closer to home. It was the arrival of a new tenant at the rental cottage up the lane. A well-dressed man of late middle age. Medium height and build, very grey at the temples. Definitely not Danish. 18. Kenistone. The cottage had 2 bedrooms, a single bathroom, a cramped sitting room, a galley kitchen, and a small terrace sheltered by the eaves of the steeply pitched roof. Because no one of sound mind came to Kenistone in autumn, Chiara was able to snag it for 2 weeks at a discounted rate. She settled the bill using a credit card linked to the Tiepolo Restoration Company and instructed the property manager to leave the cottage unlocked and the key inside. No, she said, laundry and maid service would not be necessary. The man who would be staying at the cottage would be working on an important project and wished not to be disturbed. Needless to say, she did not inform the property manager that the man in question was none other than the world's most famous retired spy, or that his project involved the recovery, by any means possible, of the concert, oil on canvas, 72.5 by 64.7 centimeters, by Johannes Vermeer. Gabriel had seen to his car and his provisions. The car, a Nissan sedan, he had rented in Hamburg. The provisions he acquired during a pre-dawn raid on a Superbrugsen in a town called Hinnerup. He placed the tins in the pantry, the perishables in the fridge, and 3 bottles of decent red wine on the countertop. Then he hung his wholly inappropriate city clothing in the closet of the larger of the 2 bedrooms. In violation of every rule of professional tradecraft, written and unwritten, he concealed 4 million euros worth of borrowed diamond jewelry and 100,000 euros in cash between the mattress and box spring. Returning to the kitchen, he brewed a pot of strong coffee and drank a first cup outside on the terrace. The view was westward across the dunes toward the sea, though it was saved from perfection by the large modern dwelling at the end of the lane. A Volvo XC90 was parked outside, and a light burned faintly behind drawn shades in a window on the 2nd floor. The surrounding cottages were darkened and shuttered and gripped by an air of sudden abandonment. Indeed, from Gabriel's vantage point, it looked as though he and his neighbor had the entire settlement to themselves. A blast of frigid wind drove him inside. He lit a fire in the wood-burning stove and drank the rest of the coffee while watching a breakfast television program on Denmark's TV2. His Danish was only slightly better than his Armenian. Still, with the help of the video images, he was able to deduce that there had been a shooting death in Copenhagen, an unusual occurrence. A weather forecast was next, followed by a political discussion. Gabriel couldn't make heads or tails of what the panelists were saying, and didn't much care. He was watching a cyclist coming down the lane from the direction of the beach. She shot past the cottage a moment later, all but invisible beneath her winter weight kit, her pedal stroke smooth and effortless, and vanished from view. A hearty soul to be heading out in conditions like these, thought Gabriel. But then he supposed she was used to it. She was Danish, after all. A bit of a chameleon, as was he. But definitely Danish. The cottage had 4 windows, one in each bedroom, a third in the sitting room, and a porthole above the kitchen sink. The woodwork was weakened by age, the latches brown with rust. The lock on the only door was aspirational. Gabriel could have picked it himself in less than a minute. He engaged it nevertheless, and after wedging a tiny paper telltale between the door and the jamb, set off toward the cottage at the end of the lane. It was the largest in the entire settlement, the newest as well, or so it appeared. Unlike its neighbors, which were sparingly furnished and occupied only during the summer months, it would doubtless have a proper security system. Sensors on the doors and windows, motion detectors and cameras. But would the Danish police receive an automatic alert in the event of a break-in? Gabriel supposed that would depend on the quality of the owner's public-facing facade. According to Corinne Nazarian, she worked as a cybersecurity consultant, in addition to her primary occupation, which was theft. Her plug-in hybrid Volvo suggested she was also something of an environmentalist, as did the unkempt heather and gorse that grew wild on her property. Gabriel paused at the end of the sandy footpath that stretched toward the cottage's entrance. The door was solid wood, with a keyless entry system and a camera. A camera, he thought, that was recording his every move. Turning, he followed the lane down to the beach, and alone at the tide's edge, weighed his options. A forcible entry and rapid search of the cottage was the most obvious course of action, though the chances of avoiding detection were slim, and there was no guarantee he would find the painting. There was also a risk, slight, that he would land in a Danish jail cell, or that he might meet the same fate as Lucas Van Damme. No, the smarter move would be to take a page from her playbook. He would make her acquaintance, earn her trust. Then they would strike a deal, one professional to another. And with any luck, Gabriel would be back in Venice in time to save his job and his marriage. But how to get close to her without tipping his hand? Office doctrine forbade direct approaches. An office field agent boarded the streetcar before the target, not after, and he always waited for the target to make the first move. But the field agent was permitted, encouraged, in fact, to prey on his target's weaknesses, to tempt his target with objects of great beauty or value, especially if the target was a sticky-fingered cat burglar with a weakness for cash and jewelry. As luck would have it, Gabriel had an ample supply of both. Lost in thought, he failed to notice the approaching wave that heaved itself onto the beach and washed over his handmade Italian suede loafers. Returning to the cottage, he composed a note, unsigned, businesslike in tone, offering the target complete immunity in exchange for information leading to the recovery of the concert by Johannes Vermeer. Then, in keeping with the finest traditions of his old service, written and unwritten, he carried it into the larger of the two bedrooms and stuffed it between the mattress and box spring. There was a single hotel in Kenaston, with an excellent restaurant that opened on weekends during the off-season. That evening, Gabriel had the dining room to himself. Erica, his pretty young waitress, was glad of his company. "What brings you to Kenaston at this time of year?" she asked.
"A desire for solitude," replied Gabriel in his most neutral accent.
"Is this your first visit?"
"Oh, no," he assured her. He had been to Kenaston on 2 previous occasions. His last stay had involved the interrogation of a kidnapped Iranian intelligence officer, but he left that part out.
"Which cottage have you taken?" asked the waitress.
He raised a hand toward the north. "I couldn't possibly pronounce the name of the street."
"Dudningebakken?"
"If you say so."
"A friend of mine lives there. The large cottage by the beach. Don't worry, she won't interrupt your solitude. Ingrid enjoys the pleasure of her own company."
She rolled past Gabriel's cottage again at 10:15 the next morning. This time, after allowing exactly 5 minutes to pass, he slid behind the wheel of the rented Nissan and set off after her. He spotted her just west of Huslik, sailing along at an impressive 44 kilometers per hour. As he overtook her, she stared straight ahead, her knees pumping rhythmically. In the rear pouch of her Gore-Tex jacket, he noticed the distinctive outline of a firearm. Something small and ladylike, he thought. Something along the lines of a Glock 26 subcompact. They both headed south on Primerute 40. Gabriel accelerated, and soon she was a speck in his rearview mirror. He drove to Frederikshavn, a busy port town on the Baltic side of the peninsula, and purchased hiking boots, thick woolen socks, base layers, undergarments, 2 pairs of corduroy trousers, a fleece pullover, an anorak, a traditional Danish zippered sweater, a waterproof coat, a pair of Zeiss Conquest HD binoculars, a French plein air easel, a palette, 6 canvases of various dimensions, 12 tubes of oil paint, 4 Winsor & Newton sable hair brushes, a bottle of solvent, and a bag of painter's rags. His last stop was a bakery near the ferry terminal, where he purchased 2 loaves of freshly baked bread. As he was leaving, he nearly collided with his neighbor, who was looking down at her phone and brushed past him with neither a word nor a glance. It was nearly 1 o'clock when she returned to her cottage in Kenniston. With the aid of his powerful Zeiss field glasses, Gabriel was able to make out much of the 14-digit passcode she entered into the keyless lock of her front door. She carried the bike inside and, upstairs, stripped off her cycling gear. Gabriel knew this because she opened the shade of her bedroom window before disrobing. He quickly lowered the binoculars and prepared his lunch, all the while wondering if her cabaret had been for him. Later that afternoon, Gabriel erected the French easel on the beach and produced a rather good seascape he would later call Kenniston Strand at sunset. His neighbor observed his efforts from her terrace for several minutes before disappearing from view. The telltale was still in place when Gabriel returned to the cottage, but he nevertheless headed straight for the bedroom. The money, jewelry, and note were where he had left them. He dined at home that evening with a bottle of red wine and a Danish television newscast for company. An update on the Copenhagen murder case appeared in the second block of the program. Gabriel found the story online, translated it into English, and read that the victim was a rare book dealer, that he had been shot twice at close range with a silenced handgun, that his killer had escaped on a motorcycle, and that police believed the motive for this brutal, well-oiled assassination was robbery, though they had yet to determine what, if anything, had been stolen. The next morning dawned cloudless and calm. Gabriel produced a work he called Cottages in the Dunes, then made the 15-kilometer hike along the beach from Kenniston to Glennen, the slender spit of sand at the northernmost tip of the Jutland Peninsula, where the incoming waters of the North Sea collide with the outgoing current of the Baltic. He arrived there to find his neighbor, in Wellington boots and an anorak, standing alone at the tip of the headland. Turning, she regarded him for a long moment without expression, then set off along the Baltic side of the peninsula toward the car park at the old nature center. Gabriel headed in the opposite direction, and took his time walking back to Kenniston. The telltale fluttered onto the threshold when he opened the door of the cottage, but the money, jewelry, and offer of immunity were nowhere to be found. The likely perpetrator of the crime had left a note on the bedside table, handwritten, formal in tone, inviting him to dinner that evening at 8 o'clock. It was addressed to the Honorable Gabriel Allon. The salutation read, "With admiration, Ingrid Johansen." 19. Kenniston. Gabriel showered and shaved and dressed in corduroy trousers, the Danish wool sweater, and his suede loafers, which somehow had survived submersion in the frigid waters of the North Sea largely unscathed. He deliberated over whether to carry his Beretta, and recalling the gun in the pocket of her cycling jacket, thought it wise. On his way out the door, he grabbed a bottle of red wine from the kitchen counter, and, perhaps presumptuously, Kenniston Strand at sunset. He didn't bother with the lock. He had nothing left to steal. Outside, the sky was cloudless and awash in hard white stars. Diamond white, thought Gabriel, as he pursued his shadow up the lane toward her cottage. The door swung open before he could ring the bell, and there she was again, in shimmering black pants and a black roll-neck pullover. Her earrings were pearl, and the bracelets on her left wrist were gold. On her right wrist was a handsome tank-style watch with a band of black leather. She wore 2 rings on her left hand and 3 on her right. But no diamonds, noted Gabriel. Not a diamond in sight. Inside, she accepted the bottle of wine, then the painting. "Is it really for me?" "I didn't have time to buy flowers, and thanks to you I didn't have any money either." She feigned ignorance. Quite well, in fact. "What do you mean?" she asked. "You removed a significant quantity of cash and jewelry from my cottage this afternoon when you left the invitation to dinner. Because none of it actually belongs to me, I'd like it back before we begin." "I'm sorry to hear that you were robbed, Mr. Allon, but I can assure you it wasn't me." So that was the game she intended to play. It promised to be an interesting evening. She left the wine on the table in the entrance hall and led him into the sitting room. The tall windows were opaque with reflected interior light, rendering the North Sea invisible, but the crashing of waves was faintly audible. It was the perfect accompaniment to the moody Scandinavian jazz that issued from her Hegel amplifier and Dynaudio speakers.
Her furniture was modern, as was the art that adorned her walls. Gabriel was not ashamed to admit that much of it was a damn sight better than the hurriedly completed winter seascape she held in her hands. She leaned the painting against a low coffee table and took a step back to admire it. "There's no signature," she pointed out.
"I don't often sign my work."
"Why not?"
"Habit, I suppose."
"You're working as an art restorer now, yes?"
"How do you possibly know that?"
"Your cottage was rented by someone from the Tiepolo Restoration Company in Venice." She lowered her voice. "Candesterna is a very small place, Mr. Alon." When he made no reply, she helped him out of his coat, and in the process managed to determine that he was carrying a firearm. She was good, he thought. He would have to watch his step tonight. She laid his coat over the arm of a chair, and bending slightly at the waist, drew a bottle from the marble wine cooler resting atop the coffee table. Her every movement was efficient and effortless and cat-like in its smoothness. "Do you drink Sancerre?" she asked.
"Every chance I get."
She filled 2 glasses. Their toast was guarded, like 2 fencers touching foils at the outset of a match.
"How did you know it was me?"
asked Gabriel. "It was rather obvious, Mr. Alon, even from a distance, but I confirmed my suspicions using facial recognition software."
"You took my photograph outside the bakery in Fredriksson."
She smiled. "A trick of the trade."
"And what trade is that?"
"I own a small cybersecurity consulting firm." Gabriel looked deliberately around the elegant room.
"You obviously do quite well for yourself."
"As you know, Mr. Alon, it's a dangerous world. There are threats everywhere." She indicated the couch, and they sat down. "Which is why it's so surprising to see a man like you in a place like this. What brings you to Candesterna?"
"An investigation I'm conducting on behalf of the Italian police."
"What sort of investigation?"
"I'm looking for a professional thief who stole a painting from a villa on the Amalfi Coast. I was told I could find her here."
"Told by whom?"
"A dirty diamond broker from Antwerp."
"I'm afraid you've been misled, Mr. Alon. Candesterna is hardly a hotbed of criminal activity."
"The events of this afternoon would seem to suggest that's not entirely the case."
"This mysterious robbery, you mean?"
"Yes."
"Are you sure your valuables are actually missing?"
"Quite sure. The cash as well."
"How much cash are we talking about?"
100,000 euros.
"I see. And the valuables?"
"About 4 million euros worth of diamond jewelry."
"The plot thickens." She tapped the rim of her wineglass thoughtfully. "Have you considered the possibility that the thief was trying to send you a message?"
"An interesting theory. What sort of message?"
"Could be anything, really, but it might have something to do with this painting you're looking for."
"Do you think she knows where it is?"
"I'm quite certain she doesn't. But she knows who had it last Friday evening."
"Who?"
"A man named Peter Nielsen."
"The rare book dealer who was murdered in Copenhagen?"
She nodded slowly.
"Does she know who killed him?"
"She has a hunch. She has a couple of decent video stills as well."
"What else does she have?"
"It's possible she has Peter Nielsen's phone."
"Why?"
She smiled sadly. "He said she had lost her touch, and she couldn't help herself." 20. Candesterna. Dinner was a candlelit buffet of traditional Danish fare, served in her formal dining room. The jewelry and cash lay between them like a centerpiece, along with a dormant mobile phone, a slumbering laptop, and Gabriel's handwritten offer of immunity.
"How did you break in?"
he asked. "I bumped the lock." Lock bumping was a technique that involved inserting a specially crafted key into a lock and tapping it with a small hammer or the grip of a screwdriver.
"That hardly seems sporting," said Gabriel. "Why didn't you just shoot off the lock instead?"
"Is that how you do it?"
"Lock-pick tools. I'm old school."
"I gathered that from the telltale."
"How did you spot it?"
"The better question is, how could I have missed it?" She lowered her pale blue eyes toward the jewelry glowing softly in the candlelight. Her hair was the color of toffee and streaked with blonde. Parted in the middle, it framed a face of straight, even features. There was nothing out of place, not a line or mark. "You have very good taste, Mr. Alon."
"Your friend Koren Nazarian told me the same thing."
"How did you convince him to betray me?"
"You know what they say about honor among thieves."
"Why didn't you simply go to the Danish police?" He pointed out the offer of immunity.
"I was hoping to settle the matter privately."
Is that still your intention?
To be determined.
By what?
Your level of candor in the next few minutes.
She added Sancerre to his glass. It isn't really an actual crime, you know.
What's that?
Stealing a stolen painting.
It is when it involves shooting someone twice in the head at close range.
I didn't kill Lucas Van Damme, Mr. Allon. She returned the bottle to the cooler. Or Peter Nielsen, in case you're wondering.
What was the nature of your relationship?
Peter was a book hunter. Collectors hired him to track down volumes of great significance or value, and when their current owners refused to part with them,
he turned to you.
She gazed at him through the candlelight, but said nothing.
How much did he pay you to steal the Vermeer?
10 million.
Kroner?
I wouldn't have touched it for that amount of money. The deal was in euros.
How was it structured?
Does it matter?
It does now.
I received half of the money up front. The rest I received when I delivered the painting to Peter last Friday evening at Jürgen's Smørbrød Café in Wiesenberg. She opened the laptop and turned the screen toward Gabriel. And this is the man who killed Peter 3 hours later outside his apartment in Copenhagen.
How did you get the video?
Click, click, click.
And Peter Nielsen's phone?
She smiled. Old school. They went through it once from the beginning. Then they went through it a second time to make certain there were no inconsistencies in her story. The date of Peter Nielsen's original offer, the nature of the information he had provided in advance, the circumstances surrounding the theft itself, the exchange of money and art at the cafe on the island of Funen. The man had been waiting there when Ingrid arrived. She reckoned he was in his late 30s or early 40s, but Gabriel, after close examination of the video and still shots, concluded he was closer to 45, maybe a bit older. He also disagreed with Ingrid's assertion that he was a Finn or from one of the Baltic states. The eyes and cheekbones suggested his ethnic roots lay farther to the east. His physical movements, in Gabriel's learned opinion, were those of a professional whose photograph Ingrid could find nowhere online. Gabriel asked her to run the photos through the search engines one more time. But once again there were no matches. Then they rewatched the video of the man's arrival at the cafe. It occurred at 5:18 p.m., 42 minutes before Ingrid was supposed to deliver the painting to Peter Nielsen.
How did you set up the meeting?
I believe we've covered that ground, Mr. Allon. Twice, in fact.
And we're going to continue covering it until I'm satisfied that the concert by Johannes Vermeer isn't in this house.
Peter and I conducted sensitive business discussions over Signal. And even then we always spoke in code.
And remind me, please, who chose the time and place?
I did, she said with a sigh. And in case you didn't hear me the first 2 times, I was the first to arrive.
At 5:30?
Yes.
And you brought the painting into the cafe?
I left it in a leather document tube in the trunk of my car.
The perfect way to transport one of only 34 known works by Johannes Vermeer.
I handled the painting very carefully, Mr. Allon. It suffered no damage while it was in my possession.
I don't suppose you took a picture of it?
That would have been a bit like keeping the bloody knife as a souvenir, don't you think? Gabriel smiled in spite of himself.
How did you get into Van Damme's vault room?
Easy peasy lemon squeezy.
Can you be more specific?
Click, click, click.
And the button under the desk that moved aside the bookcases?
I pushed it.
How did you know where to find it?
The same way I knew about the existence of the vault room.
The client told Peter?
She nodded.
And Peter never mentioned his name to you?
No, Mr. Allon. For the 3rd time, he never told me the name of the client. She nudged Peter Nielsen's phone across the table. It was an iPhone 13 Pro. But I have a feeling we might be able to find it here.
Have you tried to crack it?
Newer model iPhones are beyond my capabilities. But there's a zero-click malware called Proteus that should do the trick. It was developed a few years ago by an Israeli firm called ONS Systems. The licenses are rather hard to come by.
Not as hard as you think, said Gabriel.
Can you lay your hands on a copy?
A distinct possibility.
How's your Danish?
Non-existent, but Proteus has an auto-translation function.
That software is dreadful. You really should have a native Danish speaker looking over your shoulder, preferably someone who knew Peter well.
You?
She smiled.
You seem to be forgetting that you were the one who stole the Vermeer in the first place.
Who better to help you find it? Besides, if I stay here in Denmark, I'm liable to end up dead too. She lowered her voice. Please, Mr. Allon, let me help you find the painting and the man who killed Peter. He took up the phone.
Do you know what will happen when we turn this on?
It will pop onto the Danish network, which means we have to do the work outside the country."
"How about Paris?" suggested Gabriel.
"Any particular reason?"
"A friend of mine would like his jewelry and money back."
"In that case," said Ingrid, "Paris it is." Gabriel walked back to the rental cottage by the blue-green glow of his mobile phone. Inside, he hastily packed his clothing and toiletries. Then he stuffed his paints and solvents and rags into a plastic rubbish bag, along with the contents of the refrigerator and the undrunk wine. The French plein air easel, Winsor & Newton brushes, palette and unused canvases he set alight in the wood-burning stove. Cottages in the dunes he left behind as a small token of his esteem. If it belonged anywhere, he thought, it was here. He loaded his things into the rented Nissan and drove the 300 meters to Ingrid's cottage. She was stepping from her doorway as he drew to a stop. She entered the 14-digit passcode into the keypad, then started down the footpath, an overnight bag over her shoulder. Gabriel pressed the internal trunk release and climbed out of the car to help her, which was when he heard the sound of an approaching motorcycle. The first motorcycle he had heard in Kenestana since his arrival 2 days earlier. He spotted the headlamp an instant later, moving at high speed down the settlement's main road. For a moment it looked as though it might be headed toward the hotel, but a hard turn to the right sent it careening directly toward the spot where Gabriel and Ingrid now stood. The motorcyclist was controlling the bike with a single hand, his left. With his right, he was reaching into the front of his jacket. When it emerged, Gabriel saw the unmistakable silhouette of a gun fitted with a sound suppressor. He seized Ingrid and drove her to the ground behind the Nissan. Then he drew the Beretta from the small of his back as 2 superheated rounds split the air a few centimeters from his right ear. He did not seek cover or even flinch. Instead, he poured 4 rounds into the motorcyclist's torso, blowing the man from the saddle. Riderless, the bike continued along the lane. Gabriel sidestepped the machine, then walked over to the spot where the man was lying motionless on the pebbled concrete. His silenced firearm, a Makarov 9mm, had come to rest next to him. Gabriel pushed the weapon aside and removed the man's helmet. He recognized the face at once. In fact, he had seen it that very evening on the video from Jürgen's Smørrebrød Café. The front of the man's leather jacket was pierced with 4 bullet holes and soaked with blood, as was the black crewneck base layer he wore beneath it. The holes corresponded to the 4 in the center of the chest. Directly above the wounds was tattooed the letter Z. The bleeding was torrential. He didn't have long to live. Gabriel snapped a photograph of the dying man's face. Then he asked, "Where's the painting?" The man said nothing. Gabriel placed the barrel of the Beretta against the side of the man's knee and fired another shot. The man screamed in agony. "The painting," said Gabriel. "Tell me where I can find it." "Gone," was all the man managed to say. "Gone where?" "The collector." "What's his name?" "The collector," the man repeated. "His name!" shouted Gabriel. "Tell me his name!" "The collector," said the man a final time. And then he died. Part 2. The Conspiracy. 21. Ben Gurion Airport. By rights, Gabriel should have phoned the Danish police, gone on the record, and washed his hands of the whole affair. Instead, he rang Lars Mortensen, the longtime director of the PET, Denmark's Security and Intelligence Service. He told Mortensen that an assassin on a motorcycle had just taken a couple of shots at him in Kenesterne. He indicated that the fellow was no longer alive. Mortensen knew he was getting about 10% of the story, if that. "What were you doing all the way up there at this time of year?" "Painting," answered Gabriel, with at least a grain of truth. "You're sure he's dead?" "As a doornail." "Any idea who he was?" "The tattoo on his chest suggests he might have been a Russian. He's lying outside the cottage at the end of Dodningebakken. You can't miss him." "I'll take care of it." "Quietly, Lars. Is there any other way? But please, do me a favor, and get the hell out of the country." Gabriel killed the call, then dredged up a deceptively labeled entry in his contacts. He hesitated before dialing the number, for it rang in an anonymous building on Kings Hall Boulevard in Tel Aviv. His break with the office had thus far been remarkably clean. He was all but forgotten.
It was his abiding wish to avoid the pitfalls of rediscovery, but the Russian assassin lying dead at his feet had irrevocably altered the nature of his inquiry. He brought down his thumb on the screen, and after a delay of several seconds, a phone rang. He recognized the voice of the woman who answered, and doubtless she recognized his.
"Are you wounded?"
she asked. He said he was not.
"Do you have transport?"
"A rental."
"Can you get down to Schiphol?"
"I'm leaving now."
"How many in your party?"
2.
"The plane will collect you at the FBO tomorrow morning at 7. And don't worry about the car," the woman said before ringing off. "Amsterdam station will take care of it."
The plane in question was a Gulfstream G550 that Gabriel had acquired during the early days of the COVID pandemic, when he scoured the globe in search of ventilators, testing material, and protective medical clothing. It departed Amsterdam Schiphol Airport at 7:15 a.m. and landed at Ben Gurion at 12:30. Gabriel emerged from the cabin door to find Mikhail Abramov waiting on the tarmac. He was a tall, long-limbed man in his early 50s, with fair hair and pale, bloodless skin. His eyes were blue-gray and translucent, like glacial ice. Smiling, he extended a hand toward his former Director General. He addressed him in Russian-accented Hebrew.
"I was beginning to think we'd never see you again. It's only been 10 months, Mikhail. Trust me, it feels longer. Things haven't been quite the same around here since you left."
Born in Moscow to a pair of dissident Soviet scientists, Mikhail had immigrated to Israel as a teenager. After serving in the Sayeret Matkal, the IDF's elite special forces unit, he joined the office, where he specialized in a type of operation known as negative treatment, the office euphemism for a targeted assassination. His enormous talents, however, were not limited to the gun. It was Mikhail Abramov, at Gabriel's behest, who broke into a warehouse in a drab commercial district of Tehran and stole Iran's entire nuclear archives. He glanced at Ingrid.
"You haven't done something foolish, have you, boss?"
"I agreed to track down a stolen painting for the Italian police. Things went downhill from there." Mikhail indicated the armored SUV idling nearby.
"Your successor ordered me to personally escort you to your apartment in Narkis Street."
"Actually," said Gabriel, "we have a little errand to run first." They headed north to Mount Carmel, then east toward the Sea of Galilee. By the time they reached Rosh Pina, founded by 30 families of Romanian Jews in 1882, it was nearly 2:15. The driver started toward the mountain hamlet of Amuka and turned onto an unmarked track cut through a dense grove of cypress and pine. He slowed to a stop a moment later after coming upon 4 men in khaki vests, each clutching a Galil Ace automatic. Behind them was a chain-link fence topped with concertina wire.
"Where are we?"
asked Ingrid.
"Nowhere,"
answered Mikhail.
"What does that mean?"
"It means this place doesn't exist, which is why those 4 nice boys are about to shoot the former Director General of the office." Gabriel lowered his window, and one of the guards approached the car.
"Is that you, boss?"
"Former boss," replied Gabriel.
"You should have told us you were coming."
"I couldn't."
"Why not?"
"Because I'm not here." Gabriel glanced at Ingrid.
"And neither is she."
His real name was Alexander Yurchenko, but like most aspects of his previous life, it was gone forever. Even now, 5 years after his coerced defection to Israel, he still referred to himself by his work name, which was Sergei Morozov. He was a child of the old order. His father had been a senior official at Gosplan, the masterminds behind the Soviet Union's Marxist command economy. His mother had worked as a typist at the headquarters of the KGB, the monsters who crushed anyone foolish enough to complain. Later, she would serve as the personal secretary to Yuri Andropov, the longtime KGB chairman who would eventually succeed Leonid Brezhnev as the leader of an empire that would soon be dead and buried. Perhaps not surprisingly, it was in his mother's footsteps that Sergei Morozov chose to follow. He spent 3 years at the Red Banner Institute, the KGB's school for fledgling spies, and upon graduation was assigned to the German operations desk at Moscow Center. A year later, he was posted to the Residentura in East Berlin, where he witnessed the fall of the Berlin Wall, knowing full well the Soviet Union would crumble next. When the end came in December 1991, the KGB was disbanded, renamed, reorganized, and renamed again. Eventually, it would be broken in 2, with the Lubyanka-based FSB handling domestic security and the SVR, headquartered in Yasnievo, responsible for foreign intelligence gathering and other assorted special tasks. Sergei Morozov served in 3 declared SVR residenturas, first Helsinki, then The Hague, and finally Ottawa, where he foolishly tried to tempt the Canadian Defense Minister with a bit of honey and was asked to quietly pack his bags. His last posting was in Frankfurt, where, posing as a Russian banking consultant, he stole German industrial secrets and ensnared dozens of German businessmen in operations involving Kompromat, the Russian shorthand for compromising material. He also played a supporting role in the brutal assassination of the office's most important Russian asset. Gabriel returned the favor by abducting Morozov from an SVR safe flat in Strasbourg, stuffing him into a duffel bag and dangling him out of a helicopter over Syrian territory held by rabidly anti-Russian jihadists. The interrogation that followed had allowed Gabriel to identify a Russian mole at the pinnacle of Britain's secret intelligence service, perhaps the crowning achievement of his career. As for Sergei Morozov, he was now the lone prisoner of the same secret detention facility in the Birya forest near Roshpina, where he had undergone his initial interrogation. He lived in one of the old staff bungalows, where he spent his days watching Russian television and his nights drinking Russian vodka. Lately, he had developed a taste for the wines produced by the vineyard on the other side of the ridge. He had been in the process of removing a cork from a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc when Gabriel appeared on his doorstep unannounced, accompanied by the grey-eyed man who had handled some of the more unpleasant aspects of his interrogation. Their handshake was cordial nonetheless, warm even. Morozov seemed genuinely pleased to see the 2 men responsible for his imprisonment. They had long ago made their cold peace. What happened between them was simply part of the game. There were no hard feelings, nor was Morozov inclined to leave the secret camp in the Upper Galilee any time soon. Beyond the concertina wire, there was only the prospect of a Russian-style death.
"Are you sure you don't want to go back to Moscow?" asked Gabriel in jest. "I hear the Red Army is looking for a few good men to help turn the tide in Ukraine." "There are no good men left in Russia alone. They've all fled the country to avoid the mobilization."
"You sound disappointed."
"That my country is losing this war? That my fellow citizens are being fed into a meat grinder? That they will soon be freezing to death because they don't have proper supplies? Yes, Alon, I'm disappointed. But I'm also afraid of what comes next."
They went onto the veranda of the bungalow, his dasha, as Morozov called it. He was wearing a V-neck sweater against the cool afternoon air. Gabriel thought he looked rather good for a Russian male who had recently celebrated his 60th birthday. It was unlikely to last. Old age tended to fall on Russian men like a brick from a window. They were a bit like poor Johannes Vermeer, alive one day, dead the next. From the dusty courtyard of the camp came a muted rhythmic thumping. It was only Ingrid. Surrounded by the 4 heavily armed security guards, she was demonstrating her ability to keep a leather footbag aloft while her eyes were closed.
"Who's the girl?"
asked Morozov.
"My bodyguard." "She doesn't look Jewish to me."
"Was that a microaggression, Sergei?"
What?"
"A microaggression. A comment or action that subtly and often unconsciously expresses a prejudiced attitude toward a racial minority or otherwise marginalized group."
"Jews are hardly marginalized."
"You just did it again."
"Don't pull that shit with me, Alon. At this point, I've practically made Aliyah. Besides, if anyone is guilty of prejudice, it's you."
"Not me, Sergei. I love everyone."
"Everyone except Russians,"
said Morozov. "Are you referring to the people who massacred more than 450 innocent civilians in the Ukrainian town of Busha? Who are deliberately firing missiles into shelters crammed with women and children? Who are using rape as a part of their military strategy?"
"We Russians know only one way to fight a war."
"Or to lose one."
"Volodya is without